Chapter 706. She frowned and asked Roddy, "Is it a big problem?" In her memory, Roddy rarely made such distressed and anxious movements. It was obvious that he had encountered a problem that was difficult to solve. This made Marinsara, who was usually fearless, nervous. The gaze from the giant eye of the demon gate had buried the fear brought by the other plane deep in her heart. She would never forget it. "We have to face it. I can only hope that my judgment is wrong." Roddy took another deep breath, but his gaze suddenly froze, because he saw a mission notification that suddenly popped up. "Demon disaster. You sense the unusual movements of the demon, but you don't know what you are facing. Face it or run, the further the better." This mission didn't give a mission reward or completion goal, because this was a random mission that appeared in a specific area. This kind of mission had a high degree of freedom, and one could only roughly guess the direction of the mission through a simple description. At the same time, the final reward would be determined according to the mission difficulty and completion rate. Just like now, the mission description gave him the options of face it and run away. And one would never know which one was easier, which one would gain more, and which one was riskier. Roddy frowned and thought. In terms of risk, choosing to run away was definitely the safest choice. But simply running away wasn't Roddy's style. In the face of any crisis, Roddy would strive to have the initiative. He thought about the possible consequences of Doris and the others' actions, and immediately turned to Marinsara and said, "Bring her back to the hotel. Get ready to evacuate first." "Okay." In the short reply, Doris suddenly felt a chill on her body. When she looked down, she found that there was a strange elemental film on the surface of her body. And the color of this elemental film actually simulated the color of the surrounding walls and furniture. The next moment, her mouth was gagged by invisible elements, and her whole body was controlled and floated out of the window. As soon as she entered the night street, the film on the surface of her body turned pitch black. Under Marinsara's control, she floated for 7 or 8 meters before being thrown into a carriage that was already parked by the roadside. "At least I'm alive." This was Doris's last thought before she was stuffed into the carriage. "Activate the highest alert state. All floating space towers take to the skies." Inside the Colomere Magic Tower, President Jeremy looked at the huge magic circle that was more than 10 square meters in size and announced the current battle plan with a serious look on his face. This magic circle was created by a prophecy sorcerer. After activation, it could show the current situation of the entire Duriel city and the surrounding port. The light dots on it represented humans or mermen. At this moment, the army of the Blue Guild mermen had already disembarked from all the ports. They flooded all the docks in an instant and charged towards the city. If it weren't for the city walls that activated the magic circle and the army that was deployed to stop them, the Murlocs would have already charged into the city. However, the current situation wasn't optimistic. The standing army was scarce, and the mage's magic power was limited. No one could say for sure if the Murlocs that suddenly appeared would break through the defensive line. Thus, Speaker Jeremy, who was currently commanding the battle, didn't look relaxed. As the mages of Duriel City were deployed to the front line, the originally retreating defense line finally slowed down. Among them, the gap in the support of the sorcerers was obviously reduced. At this moment, the advantage of Lasman's high ratio of mages and the concentration of high-end combat power was immediately highlighted. When faced with the mass-killing spells of the mages, the Murlocs could only rely on their bodies to resist. Thus, when the number of mages reached a certain ratio, the situation of the battle finally changed. Behind the 200 to 300 ordinary soldiers, there were more than 30 magic apprentices and 8 official mages supporting them with their firepower. Large-scale spells that were rarely used were all put to use here. Firewall, Path of Icicles and other spells in the narrow areas caused shocking damage to the Murlocs. The morale of the Duriel city guards, who were initially frightened by the number of Murlocs, was greatly boosted. Their shouts covered the sorrowful cries of the murlocs. Under the protection of various magic shields, the soldiers finally began to brandish their long swords valiantly. In an instant, blood flowed like a river when the air was filled with the smell of burnt grilled fish. The floating space towers around Duriel City were activated one after another. Some of them were originally buried under the water, and some were embedded in the mountains. At this moment, they slowly rose into the air with a buzzing sound, and then floated towards the 4 docks. Hundreds of ballistae on the floating space towers began to pour fire like rain, mixed with extremely lethal explosive crossbow bolt. Because there was no air superiority, the murlocs who tried to push forward from the rear were all swept away by the firepower from the air. Even though they were still emerging from the sea, the pressure on the front line was instantly reduced by a lot in less than 10 minutes. The murlocs who tried to rush into the city on the docks had been killed or injured. At the same time, the front line was no longer retreating. The 10 sorcerers of the 6 academies were constantly casting spells to kill and injure the murloc. The 2 puppet troops of the Moffat Academy were urgently activated, and they would arrive on the battlefield in 3 minutes. But even so, President Jeremy, who was staring at the magic circle, was still frowning more and more, because he still could not see the upper limit of the murlocs. The detection circle and the sorcerers of prophecy could not calculate the exact number of murlocs under the sea. Just like how Houdini did not dare to explore the ruins under the sea was a natural shielding field for mages. They could still explore shallow areas, but things more than 50 meters underwater could not be detected at all. If the murlocs charged forward without any regard for their lives, no matter how powerful the mages were, there would come a day when they would run out of magic power. How could they fight against the seemingly infinite number of murlocs? Maintain order in the city. Prepare the magic circle at the top of the Colomere Magic Tower to activate. Cover fire support. As the president of the council, he was actually taking a gamble at this moment. He had to assume that the number of the murlocs was limited, so in such a battle, he had to kill the murlocs in an instant. Otherwise, if they simply let the murlocs wear themselves out, the defensive line would very likely collapse by dawn. For a long time, Duriel had not been involved in the war with Rasman. As a port city, the symbolic, floating space tower was actually used to guard against enemy warship. Using it to deal with the murlocs who had already landed on land was really like using anti-aircraft guns to kill mosquitoes, a waste of resources. Begin charging. Activate. Fire coverage locked. Charging complete. Activate stabilizing magic circle. Energy stabilizing complete. After nearly 5 minutes of preparation, the magic circle was finally ready to fire. Jeremy and the other 2 counselors pressed their hands on the magic circle at the same time. Energy release. The Colomere Tower in the dark suddenly emitted light. Rings of light spiraled up from the bottom of the tower and finally converged into a bright ball of light at the top of the tower. With a buzzing sound, the ball of light whizzed out. After leaving the top of the tower, it flew for 2 minutes, crossed a distance of 5 kilometers, and finally landed in the shallow sea outside the port. There was a sudden explosion, and the violent impact and heat evaporated a large amount of seawater on the spot. The dazzling white light that bloomed from the ball of light made the dark Duriel as bright as day in an instant. The surface of the sea was instantly filled with dismembered corpses. The originally densely packed murlocs outside the defensive line seemed to have been cut in half. In an instant, more than half of the murlocs had been cleared, and the remaining ones were also hit by the shockwave. The Rasman defenders, who had been continuously releasing protective barriers since the appearance of the ball of light, took the opportunity to counterattack, and in an instant they had retaken one of the docks. However, the bloody battle in the other 3 locations was still ongoing. The stabilizing magic circle in the Colomere Magic Tower only started charging again after 10 minutes of cooldown, when the brilliant ball of light streaked across the night sky again. Roddy's carriage had just stopped at the back entrance of the hotel. The carriage door was pushed open, and Roddy led the way into the hotel. Behind him, Merlin, Sarah, and Doris, who was disguised by the elements, followed closely behind. Roddy did not say a word as he ran into the lobby. He only gestured to David, who was originally standing vigilantly by the door. David immediately turned around and ran out with a solemn expression. The silent gesture conveyed the message, and in less than a minute, the originally silent hotel was suddenly filled with noisy footsteps. Level 1 combat readiness. Abandon the useless supplies. Erwin and David led their respective teams to the backyard where the goods were originally stacked. The various types of heavy armor and weapons that were stored in the wooden boxes were activated. The soldiers helped each other put on the equipment as quickly as possible. Then, they arranged the most important materials such as the magic circle stone slab and the recharging crystals, and threw the miscellaneous items in a corner. When they appeared in the lobby of the hotel in full armor, the other people in the hotel were all stunned. They were originally suspicious of the alarm outside, and now that they saw Erwin and his team's metal tower-like appearance, they almost thought that there was some kind of armed coup going on. Erwin and his team did not even need to say anything before they all ran away. On the third floor, Akasha, who was standing in front of the window and observing the alarm signals, saw Roddy suddenly come in. She asked curiously, "What's going on outside?" Level 1 combat readiness. Prepare for battle immediately. Roddy rushed to the wardrobe and started putting on the equipment piece by piece. Sylvia and Naife immediately realized that this was not a joke, and without another word, they all ran back to their rooms. Akasha also did not waste any time. She picked up the scepter beside her, put on the belt filled with potions and scrolls, and a small backpack. Only then did she notice Doris, who was suspended in the air by Merlincer's magic. "Why did you kidnap her?" Although Roddy had mentioned today's plan before he left, he obviously did not mention bringing Doris here. Akasha was very disgusted with these Tuck women. Fortunately, Merlin Sarah did not remove her elemental disguise. If the little priest saw Doris's vacuum suit, she would really be in trouble. The trouble they caused might be useful in times of trouble. Chapter 707. You really don't know what you've done. This was said to Doris, but the latter was looking around in a daze and did not pay attention to what Roddy said. The reason for this was that she found the equipment of these people in front of her unbelievable. Sylvia, Naife, and Akasha, who had just finished changing, were all wearing robes of the highest quality. As for the rings, necklaces, and those rippling scrolls, they were all extremely precious. Doris was also a mage, so she knew very well how difficult it was to gather a full set of equipment of this level. On the other hand, the 5 people in front of him, including Roddy, all had extraordinary items on them. Doris inexplicably felt that it was absurd. Previously, she had always felt that Roddy was bragging when he said that he was rich. But now, it seemed that just this equipment alone was enough to make him out of the category of rich. Even Queen Talia of Esker could not wear such a luxurious suit. Now that she thought about it carefully, Roddy had hidden his powerful vehicle puppet, his true personality, and his terrifyingly powerful equipment. Then what he had shown to Lassman and the others was all a facade. So what else had he not shown up until now? Before Doris could think too much, someone knocked on the door of the suite. Merlin Sarah opened the door with her magic power, only to see Houdini standing outside. The situation at the pier doesn't seem right. I've used the detect spell to take a look. There are too many Murlocs. I don't know. What do you mean? Houdini, who was speaking with a solemn expression, finally noticed Doris, who was suspended in mid-air. He was startled, but Roddy did not have time to explain to him. He asked directly, "Based on your understanding, how long can the Murlocs last if they keep attacking like this?" Boom. Houdini furrowed his brows and said after a while, "Logically speaking, now that the sorcerers are in position, and with the help of all kinds of control spells, we should be able to suppress this kind of enemy very quickly. However, if the mage tower is involved in the attack, it means that the situation is not looking good. The Corin Mills long-range attack can only be used 5 times at most, and within these 5 attacks, the core of the magic circle will have to be changed. Changing the magic circle will take at least half an hour to adjust. So, if the Murlocs still haven't retreated after 5 attacks, I'm afraid we'll have to prepare to retreat. Originally, Houdini had faith in Lockman's strength. However, after traveling around the kingdom of Karen, his horizons had been broadened by several levels, so his way of thinking had changed greatly. Based on the results of his own detection, his judgment was already very close to the truth. Roddy never doubted his men. After hearing Houdini's words, he immediately said, "Retreat! Retreat to the north. Houdini, you're familiar with the roads, so lead the team." Houdini nodded, turned around and went downstairs. Then, Roddy grabbed Doris and asked, "Your companions are going to pretend to escape in the chaos, right?" Doris nodded hurriedly. She did not know what fate was waiting for her. Was she going to be left here, waiting to be killed by the Murlocs that might invade this place? However, to her surprise and horror, after a brief consideration, Roddy gestured to Sylvia, "Take her with you." "Yes." Turning around, Roddy picked up the dragon bone bow and said, "Naife, stay with Akasha. Don't leave her." This was not the first time that Naife had experienced such a situation. She nodded, held the magic circle stone plate in her hand, and rushed downstairs after Roddy. The Dragon Lance Knights pulled the war horses that they had been carefully feeding. Each of them rode on 2 horses, divided into 3 teams, and moved forward under Houdini's guidance. Their backpacks were loaded with secondary weapons, and the rechargeable lances in their hands were already inserted with crystals. Erwin and the others carried battle shields and axes, and all of them ran with almost 0 weight under the buff of spells. Meanwhile, Roddy threw Doris behind the driver's seat of the Firebolt and stuffed 2 boxes of rechargeable crystals into the reserved storage compartment at the back of the carriage. He also covered the compartment with 7 or 8 stacked magic circle stone plate. Then, he had Marinthra cast a spell to bind the boxes and drive the carriage to catch up with the rest of the team. When the 3rd ball of light from the Colomere magic tower exploded, they filed out of the hotel and headed straight for the north gate. What's going on? On the other side of the street, the 3 assassins who witnessed everything were dumbfounded. The explosion of the ball of light illuminated the sky, and they saw the equipment level of this team. The metal plate armor that reflected the silver light and magic waves was truly dazzling. What made the trio even more afraid was that the soldiers in front of them were definitely not wearing luxurious armor. Just by looking at the tacit changes in formation, they could feel the aura of an elite soldier who had been through hundreds of battles. Are they trying to escape? Have you ever seen a team that is more ferocious in escaping than charging? The 3 assassins looked at each other, and then at the coastline that was filled with red signals after the white light faded. They all realized that the situation was far more complicated than they had imagined. But they were, after all, a team of assassins who were ready to kill, not spectators. After a brief discussion, the 3 decided to immediately follow Roddy's team. After all, no matter what, completing the mission was their top priority. So, Shalda, Ethan, and Breton quickly stole 3 horses from the stables of the hotel and followed them. "What's that sound?" Miranda suddenly asked. Jill, who was beside her, listened and confirmed, "It's the sound of hooves, and there are quite a lot of them." Evelyn immediately felt that something was wrong. She immediately ordered the male servant beside her, "Go and find out who they are." Because the hotel was next to each other, the servant's investigation result was soon found. After learning that all the envoys from the kingdom of Karen have left, Evelyn had a look of disbelief on her face. They ran away just like that? Currently, in the entire Duriel, there were no foreign envoys who actually took action to evacuate. because everyone had succumbed to Lasman's tyranny for too long. No matter how they looked on the surface, they were still afraid of the power of the mages. At this time, they also did not think that there would be anyone who could really threaten Duriel. After all, this was the place with the most high-end combat power in Lasman. What enemy could the floating space tower, magisters, and countless warships not be able to defeat? The patriarchs of Icica were the masterminds, so they knew that they could not be the first to stick out. But what was with this team of envoys? Did they just abandon Roddy and escape alone? Doris won't fail. Roddy can't escape from her palm, so this team probably made their own decision, Evelyn judged with narrowed eyes. She then waved her hand, sat back in her seat, and raised her wine glass. Ignore them, what we need to do now is to continue waiting. Come, this glass, to Queen Talia. To the Queen. Boom! Outside the window, the fourth explosion suddenly sounded, followed by a violent tremor that had never occurred in the previous 3 times. The entire hotel shook along with it, and the bottle that was originally filled with wine fell on the expensive camel fur carpet with a thud, causing the 3 to look out of the window in confusion. Oh my queen, is this the power of a magister? Red vortex-like clouds appeared in the dark sky, and there was a long trail of smoke in the center. Obviously, this was the level 55 high-grade spell, Great Meteor spell, that only an orthodox magister could cast. After this spell, another magister also cast Meteor Fire Rain. Thousands of meteors whizzed down and smashed into the murlocs that were almost squeezed together on the port. After that, Cloud Storm, Arctic Icefall, and other spells fell one after another on the murlocs. No matter how strong the murlocs were and how strong their attacks were, when faced with the terrifying elemental lethality of the magisters, they finally showed signs of weakness. They can't have really blocked it, can they? Jill's hand, which was holding the potion bottle, turned a little pale. After all, this was a mission that had been carried out by countless people over the years in Icica. If it was blocked just like that, it would be difficult to find a similar opportunity in the future. More importantly, if the mission was not completed, how would they explain it to Her Majesty Talia when they returned? No, Her Majesty Talia told me with absolute certainty. Even if all the magisters of Lesamon were in Duriel, they still wouldn't be able to block this attack. Evelyn said with absolute certainty. Her resolute look made Miranda and Jill relax a little, but the 2 of them didn't know that Evelyn was also a little uncertain in her heart. After all, murlocs were only murlocs. Could it be that there were magisters among them? And if she were to personally take a look at the battlefield, she would find that Jill's guess was really not far from the truth. At this moment, the port of Duriel had already become a purgatory. As time went on, the murlocs that climbed ashore became taller and taller, and the power of their charge became more powerful. As a result, ordinary human soldiers were unable to resist or even parry the attacks. Some even had their shields cut in half by the murlocs' frenzied attacks. In the face of this kind of attack, only the construct puppets that were constantly arriving could barely block the murloc. But the flying parts and continuous wear and tear indicated that the construct puppets could not hold on for too long. Fortunately, the Magister's high-grade spells, together with the long-range bombardment of the Corin Mill magic tower, finally caused a break in the murloc's charge. The originally densely packed fish heads on the surface of the sea suddenly became floating corpses after being baptized by the spells. And through the continuous casting of ice spells, the frozen sea also greatly slowed down the murloc's advance. Including the Duriel mages who rushed over spontaneously, there were already more than 800 magisters at the port's entrance to Duriel. The quantitative change produced a qualitative change. The battle finally changed from a bitter struggle to a continuous bombardment of spells. The magisters who had gotten a chance to catch their breath immediately began to meditate and rest, seizing the time to recover their magic power. Everyone secretly heaved a sigh of relief because no matter how they looked at it, the murlocs would not rush into the city. But just as everyone was thinking about this, the sound of waves suddenly came from the pitch-black night sky. Those with better eyesight looked at the distant sea and suddenly asked curiously, "Why are the waves so big? Is there a tsunami?" These words made everyone tense up. Immediately, dozens of illumination spells appeared on the surface of the sea, allowing people to clearly see the rolling waves that were 5 to 6 meters high. But before they could make a follow-up judgment, the constantly crashing waves suddenly became smaller. At the same time, the sea seemed to have started a huge ebb in just a few seconds. The floating murlocs' corpses were left on the beach as the waves suddenly receded. In less than half a minute, the entire beach's waterline actually receded by dozens of meters. Everyone looked at each other. No one had seen such a strange scene. But as another illumination spell was used to illuminate the sky, everyone at the port simultaneously took a breath of cold air. Only then did they realize that there was a huge object rapidly rising from the surface of the sea. How big was it? Even they could not measure the width of the object in front of them because they could only see a hemispherical body in the middle rising. That posture was like they were witnessing a mountain rising from the sea with their own eyes. Wallalala, the sound of water echoed in their ears, but the speed of the mountain rising did not slow down at all. Everyone's eyes gradually turned from level to level, and finally, they actually raised their necks to look at the sky. What is this? Am I hallucinating? Run. At first glance, they could only see a hemispherical shell that suddenly appeared from the sea, reflecting the moonlight. The surface of its body was covered with all kinds of barnacles, corals, and a mess of sea creatures. Just the height alone was already close to 100 meters. Because most of its body was still in the water, it was impossible to see how wide it was. But in terms of size, this creature had already surpassed the category of ordinary sea magic beasts, because it was almost a moving island. Because of the continuous falling of the giant beast, the noise had completely covered the people's screams of fear and the murlocs attacking again. The mages who were originally at the front line were also dumbfounded by such an enemy. When they realized that the giant beast was moving towards Duriel City, they immediately aimed all their firepower at it. But in the blink of an eye, no matter how high the level of the high-grade spell was, it was like a mosquito that crashed into an elephant. The Flame Blast spell's explosion range was more than 10 square meters, but for the surface area of the giant beast, it was not even 1%. More than 10 mid-grade single-target spells followed closely behind and smashed on the surface. The sound of the spells was not small, but they only cleaned up the barnacles on the surface and did not have any other effect. But this action angered the giant beast, and a tentacle suddenly stretched out from the mountain-like body and smashed down without warning. Chapter 708. The camp that was still shouting and clamoring a moment ago suddenly fell into a dead silence. The indiscriminate, destructive attack directly annihilated all the creatures in the area. Whether it was the magisters, mages, soldiers, or the charging murlocs, all of them died. The tragic loss immediately stopped the mages who were planning to continue attacking. They had already realized that the monster in front of them was not something that could be defeated by human strength. Their morale almost collapsed instantly. Most of them turned around and began to flee into the city. The 4 positions that were originally tightly guarded had completely changed hands in 3 minutes. The murlocs that followed behind directly marched into the city area of Duriel. The murlocs that invaded the land were not like bandits in the usual sense. They did not know what plunder was because all of these murlocs had lost their minds due to demonization. In terms of intelligence, they could only be called beasts. Landing on the land and killing were deeply rooted in their minds. Therefore, after invading the city area, the only thing that the murlocs did was to find other creatures and tear them into pieces. The fleeing guards were caught up and torn into pieces by the murlocs' sharp teeth. The mages had more life-saving measures, but some were still caught up by the murlocs and torn to pieces on the spot. Now that the front line had completely collapsed, this kind of rout was impossible to stop. Even if a few magisters tried to stabilize the morale and forcefully kill a large number of murlocs, they still could not stop the situation from collapsing, because in front of the approaching giant beast, everyone was as weak as an ant. The chaos quickly spread to the city. The number of murlocs that kept surging out of the sea was still astonishing. After the previous round of bombardment, more than 5,000 murlocs had died on the spot. However, these creatures that had lost their minds were not an army. If an army suffered more than 30% casualties, it would definitely collapse. But now, even if all the demonized murlocs died in battle, no one would retreat. Therefore, the remaining over 10,000 murlocs went on a killing spree in the city, directly turning the city upside down. When Evelyn and the others heard the noise coming from not far away, they all looked out of the window with joy. "Your Majesty is right. They did not stop it. Act according to the plan immediately. Let's go. Doris is not back yet. What should we do? She has the ability to repel the murloc. Don't worry about her. Let's go first." Evelyn pulled Jill, who was looking around, and immediately ran out of the hotel. At this time, the only thing they could do was to go with the flow and escape. After all, no matter how big the disaster was, it was difficult to wipe out Duriel. If Isika wanted to continue to stand, they must not leave any traces behind. Evelyn knew how to control the situation well. When the envoys of the other countries were preparing to leave, Isika's team had already rushed out of the hotel and headed north. What they didn't know was that their retreat route was unintentionally the same as Roddy's. Right now, the 3 Tuck women were 2 kilometers away from the collapsed defense line. If they walked north for 2 kilometers straight, they would pass by the Colomere Magic Tower. They would reach the North City Gate if they continued to walk 3 kilometers to the north. The merepeople couldn't catch up with the speeding team on the empty street. Therefore, as long as Evelyn led the team out of this city, they would basically be out of danger. The plan was realized step by step. Although the situation was urgent, Evelyn and the others were filled with indescribable joy. The team ran all the way. When they approached the foot of the Colomere Magic Tower, they saw many people walking out of the street to look. Some of them chose to hide in their homes, while others chose to escape to the north. At this moment, there was a sudden humming sound from the magic tower. Then, several beams of light bloomed from the top of the tower and shone directly toward the southern coast. The next moment there was a series of exclamations. Because the height of the magic tower was more than 100 meters, the light it emitted from the top of the tower was only half the height of the behemoth. In other words, the horrifying creature that had reached the shore was at least 200 meters tall. After the cry of surprise, fear quickly spread. Miranda, who looked back curiously, also screamed and nearly fell off the camel. Evelyn and Jill also turned their heads around when they saw this, and they were stunned on the spot. "What is this?" Her Majesty the Queen didn't say anything about this. As the instigators of this attack, the development of the situation was completely out of their control. Obviously, the only thing they could do now was to continue running for their lives. Don't look back. Keep running. Evelyn immediately made a decision. She couldn't care less about Doris and Roddy's sacred beast. In the face of death, they made a decisive decision. If the escape was a competition for all the members of Duriel City, then Roddy, who decisively ordered everyone to retreat, would definitely be the first in the echelon. His decision bought the entire team plenty of time. When the light from the Colomere Magic Tower reflected the figure of the giant beast in the distance, Houdini, who was leading the way, already saw the North City Gate not far away. In other words, this diplomatic group of more than 40 people had already arrived at the northern end of Duriel City, the safest place in the entire city. Roddy, who was driving steadily on the firebolt, glanced at Misha, who was running beside him. He turned around and read the changes in the mission description of Devil Disaster. You have chosen to avoid this disaster. Because of your decision, the entire team has left the danger zone without suffering any losses. Rush out, leave this city, and the disaster will have nothing to do with you. Mission completion requirement: leave the North City Gate of Duriel. Mission reward: 12,400 EXP. Obviously, this was the fastest way to complete a random mission. Roddy looked at the North City Gate that was just inches away from him and heaved a sigh of relief. However, when he turned around and saw the giant black figure on the other side of the city, he immediately stepped on the brakes. Bam! Due to the inertia, Doris crashed into the back of Roddy's seat. The force was so strong that it almost broke her ribs. She coughed so hard that she couldn't speak. However, Roddy didn't have time to care about her. He jumped off the firebolt and stopped the team in front of him. The clueless team turned around and were as shocked as Roddy. Naife covered her mouth with her hands because from where she was standing, the gigantic beast was as terrifying as a mountain. What I was afraid of really happened. I didn't expect it to really appear. What is that thing? Melinthra's expression was solemn. There weren't many creatures that could make her nervous, but the thing in front of her was beyond her understanding. Even the secret books of the dragons didn't have such a creature recorded. In terms of size, this thing could easily destroy Duriel City. It was a destroyer of civilizations, a creature that shouldn't exist in this world. Thinking of this, she suddenly realized something and blurted out, "This is a demon? It's their doing." Roddy, who was standing next to the firebolt, pointed at Doris and said angrily and helplessly, "Is the demon infection something that you bunch of amateurs can control? Why did you have to infect the sea? Not only did you have to infect the sea, but you had to go deep into the sea. Let's see what you have done." Doris, who was reprimanded by him, couldn't even reply because she was scared silly. Her eyes stared at the giant body that was illuminated by the magic tower in the distance. Her face was as pale as a sheet, and her body trembled uncontrollably. How could this be? How could this be? Roddy, what is this thing? Could it be an illusion? Houdini's voice was also trembling. He couldn't accept that this thing was real. If the shadow was real, how could Duriel City fight back? However, it wasn't Roddy who answered him. It was the reaction of the giant beast under the beam of light. Suddenly, 4 to 5 thick tentacles emerged from under its body and wrapped around a nearby floating space tower. Then, it threw the floating space tower to the south of the sea. With a gulp, Houdini swallowed his saliva and felt his legs cramping. I thought there would be some large demonic sea beasts, but I didn't expect it to be the most terrifying ancient creature. This thing can only be created by humans. It can't be formed naturally, because it doesn't belong to this world. Roddy stared into the distance, combining the memories brought by devil control to verify the identity of the ancient sea beast in front of him. There are 2 types of ancient demonic sea beasts recorded. One type is purely self-strengthening, but it can't stay on land for too long because it takes too much energy to support its weight. This type will go back on its own after it's done messing around. What about the other type? They have strong defense and can reproduce. They are divided into mother and daughter. This is the real trouble. If we don't kill it before it takes over more resources, no one knows what will happen to this world. How do you know? Has this thing appeared before? Marinsura asked curiously. Roddy answered quickly, the High Elves experienced it before. A Grand Arcanist died before they found a solution. The title Grand Arcanist usually meant that it was above level 60. Marinsura instantly understood how terrifying the enemy was. But before she could say anything else, the giant beast in the distance changed again. Densely packed holes suddenly appeared on its body. At first glance, it looked as if it had suddenly grown thousands of compound eyes. It was a hair-raising sight. The next moment, black balls started shooting out of the holes. Chapter 709. Bang, 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 a series of crashing sounds could be heard. The meatballs that fell from the sky instantly destroyed many houses. But soon, everyone saw that these meatballs were not just cannonballs used for destruction. They were strange creatures with spherical bodies and more than 10 tentacles. Their bodies did not shatter after suffering the impact. Instead, they slowly stretched out with great tenacity. After a short period of breathing, they actually stood up and began to move around. Very quickly, they brought along a series of screams and miserable cries. "Damn it! It's the offspring of the parent," Roddy cursed. The last thing he wanted to see had happened. If it was one of those giant beasts that would leave after making a scene, he would definitely turn around and leave immediately. But after confirming that it was the parent giant beast, he immediately changed his mind. He immediately shouted at Houdini, "We can't leave. We must kill it immediately. Otherwise, Lockman and even this continent will be finished." This was not a joke. The parent giant beast was a terrifying amphibious existence. Who knew if it would cross the ocean and attack EFTA after it developed into a nest? At this time, in the entire Lockman, only Roddy knew how to completely eliminate this giant beast. He could not let a creature that could destroy the continent grow freely. Then what should we do? Houdini felt that his brain was not enough to process the situation. Was Roddy going to lead the team to kill this creature? "We are useless. You must contact the sorcerers of the Congress immediately." Roddy's tone was firm. "If they are willing to listen to me, there is still a chance." Roddy did not finish his sentence, but Houdini understood. So, he did not waste any time and immediately agreed to rush to the Colomere magic tower. Of course, Roddy would not let him run to the city full of monsters alone. He decisively ordered, "Everyone, follow me. Protect Houdini. Kill all the monsters that come near." The reason he dared to rush back was not because he was dizzy from the fever. Only those who truly understood this kind of demon would know that the mother looked terrifying, but in fact it was at its weakest. His mountain-like body represented a huge burden. The tentacles' attacks were only effective when they got close. As long as he stayed far away, the tentacles would be too far away to reach him. If he wanted to attack from a distance of more than 500 meters, he would have to pay a huge price. As for the child saplings, they were not very powerful combat unit. They were all energy collectors around level 20. Normal people would not be able to deal with them, but an elite team like Roddy was not afraid at all. To put it simply, it was not difficult for Roddy to heavily injure or even kill it before it completely developed into a truly powerful nest. But not everyone could make decisions as calmly as Roddy. Everyone, including Speaker Jeremy, was shocked by the prehistoric sea beast's terrifying size, and was at a loss of what to do. The fleeing team also included the mages who had just gathered. After witnessing the scene of hundreds of people being smashed into meat paste, they no longer had the courage to attack the mountain of flesh behind them. They only knew to run for their lives towards the magic tower. For the mages, the magic tower, which was protected by a barrier, was the only safe place. The Colomere magic tower did not let them down. After a short moment of hesitation, Speaker Jeremy stood his ground and immediately directed the magic tower to aim at the giant beast in the distance and fired the fourth energy missile. The light ball did not fly very fast, but it flew straight towards the giant beast's upper body. As if sensing the threat, the latter suddenly stretched out a large number of tentacles when the light ball approached and whipped the light ball, causing it to explode on the spot. Flesh and blood flew everywhere, and the giant beast's tentacles were all smashed into pieces. But after the light from the explosion faded, people found that the surface of the giant beast's body was actually unharmed. "Speaker, the cooling circle needs to be replaced. Magic crystal stabilizing circle has a crack. It needs to be repaired immediately." 4 consecutive powerful attacks with short intervals had affected the core circle of Calamir. Therefore, Jeremy had no choice but to immediately ask the mages to repair and replace the circle. However, the giant beast seemed to be completely enraged by this attack. Countless holes appeared on its body again, and for the second time, it spat out nearly 1,000 children. The children, that landed in the inner part of the city, along with the murlocs that had already rushed in, instantly brought about a great deal of chaos. These tentacled monsters could almost ignore the terrain. They quickly climbed over the buildings and killed all the humans in their sight. The troops that were trying to escape from the murlocs had no choice but to face these monsters that were more than 2 meters tall. Due to the latter's strange attack patterns, even the mages had a hard time dealing with them. In an instant, the retreating mages were held back by these children. Although the powerful mages quickly blasted a path out, it was obvious that more people were trapped in a difficult battle because of their appearance. In the face of such a threat, the Calamir magic tower was helpless. This was because the magic tower's most powerful long-range attack circle had a problem. At this moment, they could only rely on other small circles to clean up the enemies within 100 meters of the tower. Compared to the threat of the entire Duriel city, this was a drop in the bucket. What was more frightening was that Jeremy and the other mages could already see from the circle in front of them that the giant beast was slowly moving forward. If the beast was allowed to get close to the Calamir magic tower, the consequences would be unimaginable. But the problem now was, facing such a big guy, how could they defeat it? Lastman's achievements today were naturally the result of the hard work of the mages. The entire country had not lost its original courage and combat power. Therefore, Speaker Jeremy immediately made the decision to fight. Mages had their pride. Since the magic tower's circle could not handle it, they could only rely on the strength of the high-ranked mages to fight it. Hurry up and change the circle. Gather all the mages present and go to the top of the tower. At this moment, the entire Duriel city was in chaos. Fortunately, whether it was the female worms or the crazy murlocs, they did not seem to be interested in the humans who were hiding. Most of the people they attacked and killed were exposed in their field of vision. The civilians in the city were not combat unit. When they heard the screams and the hissing of the monsters, they instinctively closed their doors and windows and hid in their homes. Therefore, the murlocs who could not find their targets continued to rush into the city. However, the female worms did not run around aimlessly like the murlocs. After they eliminated the humans who posed a threat to them, a furry organ extended from the bottom of their tentacles. This organ seemed to have a special sense of smell. After staying in the air for a few seconds, they would immediately run in a certain direction. Not long after, these female worms would often rush into a building's window and use their large tentacles to search around. Finally, they would pull out the small magic crystal embedded in the indoor circle. Obviously, these female worms had the same target. They were all constantly searching for large and small magic crystal or objects with magical power. The more efficient ones had even swallowed more than 10 magic crystals. When the female worms carried a certain amount of objects, these monsters would stop moving forward and turn towards the direction of the mother worm. Such behavior was difficult to be noticed in the pitch-black night. At this moment, the people in Duriel City were either busy running for their lives or were busy dealing with the crisis like the people in the Corin Mill magic tower. Among them, the well-prepared group from Essica was naturally the group that escaped relatively smoothly. If the mother worm in the distance did not shoot a shocking number of female worms into the sky, Evelyn and the others would not have encountered any enemies at all. However, when the monsters from the sky landed in front of the group, they had to bite the bullet and raise their magic staffs and weapons to fight. Continue charging. Don't stop. As the commander of the group, Evelyn commanded the captain of the guard loudly. But everyone could hear the undisguised tremor in her voice. In fact, at this time, everyone was equally afraid. The 200-meter-tall monster behind them was like a nightmare pressing down on their chests, making it difficult for them to breathe. Facing the female worm, that was 2 to 3 meters tall, the soldiers of Essica were somewhat confused and did not know how to fight at all. They rushed forward and tried to slash at the monster with their weapons. However, the monster relied on its body and antennae to send 4 approaching soldiers flying. At the same time, it pressed its body forward and pressed the guard captain under its body. Its hidden mouth bit the guard into several pieces with a few "kacha-kacha" sounds. Hearing the scream of the captain of the guard that came to an abrupt stop, the soldiers could not help but panic. However, as the magic circle in Evelyn's hand released the suppression aura, the monster immediately screamed and was pressed to the ground by an invisible force. The soldiers around quickly rushed forward and waved their weapons desperately, chopping the female worm into pieces of wriggling flesh. The struggling female worm could not get rid of the influence of Evelyn's magic circle and was finally chopped to death. However, this could not stop the fear from spreading in the hearts of the Tuck tribe. The surrounding dark buildings made rustling sounds. Evelyn commanded the soldiers to gather and retreat. However, they did not go far before another female worm blocked the way of the team. According to the original plan, if the infected Murlocs caught up with the team, Miranda could use the Dispel spell to drive the Murlocs away. After all, these Murlocs had been influenced since the beginning, so using the Dispel spell was a very effective choice. However, they did not expect that they were facing a female worm that was ejected by a giant monster at the bottom of the sea. These Murlocs obviously had independent thoughts and were completely different from the Murloc. Evelyn could only pray that the battle would end soon. Therefore, she, Miranda, and Jill attacked the female worm in front of them with all their strength. However, when they were panting and killing the third monster, they suddenly heard noisy footsteps and the unique Euloyula cry of the Murlocs from the back of the street. Damn it! After burning the female worm in front of her with the flame pillar magic circle, Evelyn turned around and found that the Bindu Kingdom's knights were fleeing towards them with a large group of Murlocs following behind them. Miranda! Dispel them, we have to go now. At this time, there was no other way. Evelyn could only let Miranda use the ultimate move. Otherwise, if the Murlocs caught up and surrounded them, none of them would be able to escape. After hearing that, Miranda immediately held the necklace in front of her chest. After chanting a series of incantations, a spiritual wave suddenly spread out. At this time, the Bindu Kingdom's diplomatic mission that was being chased by the Murlocs had already approached the Icica Kingdom's soldiers, who were panting heavily. The leader was the little Khan Duke. He raised his torch and shouted, "Go north, keep going. Gather up. It's safer with more people." As a race that lived on horseback, even the lowest servant among them had strong combat strength. All of them could be said to be adept with a knife and a horse. Therefore, this 50 to 60 cavalry team was one of the few that could escape unscathed among all the diplomatic mission. In this situation, it was true that they could only help each other to get through this together. Regardless of whether they were familiar with each other or not, facing those monsters behind them, Evelyn knew that cooperation was the only way out. Therefore, she immediately ordered the whole team to move closer to the Bindu Kingdom's cavalry team. Although there was also an infantry team behind them, it was obvious that there were more cavalry and the knights had stronger combat strength. Their horses and leather armor were splattered with the internal organs and blood of the Murlocs. The smell of blood could be said to be overwhelming. And just as the two teams were about to converge, Miranda's incantation finally took effect. The Murlocs that were originally following closely behind all stopped in their track. After a short moment of hesitation, they turned around and ran in other directions, as if they did not see the two teams in front of them at all. Phew! Miranda's eyes widened. After making sure that the Murlocs at the end of the street had left, she let out a heavy breath. They ran away. They all ran away. Seize the opportunity, leave quickly. Evelyn also breathed a sigh of relief. The Bindu kingdom beside her did not have any mages who knew spiritual spells, so they all thought that it was Miranda's credit. They all expressed their gratitude and then expressed their willingness to go north to seek refuge. Both sides immediately got ready to speed up and escape. However, just as the team finished adjusting, the slate magic circle in Evelyn's hand suddenly buzzed. She turned her head to take a look, and instantly, her face turned pale. She immediately shouted, "Be careful around." Before she could finish, everyone heard the sound of bricks shattering around them. The old man beside Duke raised his hand and threw a white stone into the air. The stone suddenly released a bright light, instantly illuminating the surrounding scenery. Chapter 710. This situation was definitely not normal. In the battle with the subsidiary bodies, the team was attacked because they happened to run into their active area. The subsidiary bodies that were further away did not take the initiative to attack them at all. Therefore, such a large-scale siege immediately caused everyone to be dumbfounded. Duke and the others, who were in a hurry to respond to the battle, did not expect that these children, who were charging at them aggressively, did not seem to see them at all. They pounced straight at Miranda's position, and the soldiers who could not dodge in time were directly knocked into the air. Even when the Bindu cavalry swung their swords and cut off their tentacles, they did not turn around to counterattack. Help! Help! Only then did Miranda realize that all 8 subsidiary bodies were actually coming for her. She held the necklace in her hand and desperately cast mental attack. Beside her, Jill continuously threw out several potions. Evelyn used all her strength to construct a magic circle, but the 3 of them and the dozen guards guarding beside them could not stop the subsidiary bodies from all directions. Risking the danger of being corroded by the potions and burned by the magic circle, one of the subsidiary bodies that broke through the defense line immediately swung its tentacle at Miranda, whipping her to the ground. Then, another subsidiary body stretched out its tentacle and wrapped around Miranda. With a twist, it directly lifted her up. "Help me! Help!" Miranda's cries turned into shrill screams of pain. Several child bodies even ignored the guards and knights beside them and actually began to fight over her on the spot. 7 or 8 tentacles all wrapped around Miranda's body, the tremendous force directly crushing her ribs and rupturing her internal organs. No matter how hard the soldiers attacked, they couldn't stop Miranda. Evelyn and Jill watched as Miranda spat out a mouthful of blood and stopped breathing. They were so shocked that their minds went blank. Why did this happen? In the end, Miranda's body was snatched by one of the subsidiary bodies. Like storing a magic crystal, it opened its tentacles at the bottom of its body and swallowed the entire body. Then, it turned around and left into the distance. The remaining subsidiary bodies turned around and pounced at Evelyn and Jill. "Quick, quick, stop them!" Evelyn's voice was trembling when she said this. She had a hunch that these monsters' target was the few chiefs. But with such a close distance, even if the Bindu Kingdom's knights came to help, they could not stop these monsters' tentacles. The soldiers in front of Evelyn and Jill were either knocked away or pushed back. The corrosive potions that Jill threw out corroded at least 3 subsidiary bodies and made them roll on the ground. However, the monster that broke through Evelyn's magic circle suddenly stretched out its tentacles and wrapped around her wrist. The remaining potions were knocked over and splashed on the monster's tentacles. However, these monsters endured the pain and forced their way to Jill. Then, they wrapped their tentacles around her neck several times and immediately broke her neck with a body. Evelyn's struggling body suddenly drooped down. She was so frightened by this horrifying scene that she could barely stand on her feet. At this moment, the guards around her were either injured or dead. However, the remaining 4 subsidiary bodies completely ignored the Bindu Kingdom's knights who were trying to rescue her and continued to surround her. The next moment, the magic circle shield was completely shattered. Evelyn only felt that her feet and hands were wrapped by the tentacles. Then, she felt dizzy and her whole body was suspended in the air due to the pulling force from different directions. Ah! In the midst of the painful cry, the tearing force of the subsidiary bodies dislocated her left arm on the spot. Evelyn felt that her body was likely to be torn into pieces by these monsters. However, the only thing she could do now was to beg for a quick death. Crack! Evelyn's right calf was twisted into a fried dough twist with a strange crisp sound. She even saw her toes pointing towards the original position of her heel while she struggled. Just when she thought she was going to die, she suddenly heard a series of dense hoofbeats. "Get out of the way!" Someone suddenly shouted. Following that, a series of explosions caused Evelyn's ears to go deaf for a short period of time. In her vision, the white light engulfed those tentacles. The splattering blood stung her cheeks and her mouth was instantly filled with a pungent smell. Plop! After her body landed on the ground, the intense pain from her limbs made Evelyn open her mouth wide. However, she could only keep gasping for air, and couldn't even scream. However, this situation did not last for more than a few seconds. A golden light descended from the sky, and the pain in her body instantly dissipated by a lot. Then, she realized that she quickly regained the feeling in her limbs. Even her twisted and shattered calf was magically straightened. Evelyn widened her eyes and tried to lock her gaze on the tall knight in silver armor in front of her. However, she realized that the one who was talking to little Count Duke was David, who stood at the entrance of the hotel next door as a guard every day. "Why, you guys?" Looking around blankly, Evelyn realized that the ground around her was filled with the fragments of the subsidiary body. Not even a complete corpse could be found. When she focused her gaze forward again, she saw Roddy, who was charging towards her with the fire arrow. At the same time, she also noticed Doris, who was bound by magic and lying on the back of the driver's seat. "Doris? What happened to you?" She wanted to question Roddy, but when she saw his cold gaze, she could not help but shiver. "It's safest to run to the magic tower. I have a way for the Parliament to deal with that guy in the distance." Roddy pointed in the direction of the north gate and said, "Even if you run there, you will still die. That place is full of these monsters." Roddy obviously did not intend to rely on his dozens of men to fight alone. His words did not give Duke a choice. Instead, it was almost like an order. Based on Little Khan's usual temper, why would he listen to such words? But with the scene of Davian and the others using the charged lance to instantly kill the 4 monsters, he couldn't bring himself to reject the offer. "You'll live if you follow me. Do as you see fit." After saying that, Roddy ordered the team to move forward. From the beginning to the end, he did not pay any attention to Evelyn. However, when the team walked past Evelyn, Marinsura used a spell to lift the Icica emissary up and threw her to the back of the fire crossbow, right next to Doris. Doris only vaguely saw the scene of the battle but did not know what happened. No one would have thought that the two would meet in such a manner. Evelyn actually had a lot of questions she wanted to ask, but her head was buzzing and she had yet to react to what had just happened. Doris saw that Evelyn was covered in blood and tried to turn her head to ask, "Were you attacked just now? Where are Miranda and Jill?" Evelyn, who was originally gloomy, burst into tears. Doris never thought that the shrewd chief would cry out loud. Her heart skipped a beat and she felt that something was wrong. When Evelyn told her that Miranda and Jill were killed by the monsters, Doris's mouth was wide open and she was completely dumbfounded. Lying on the shaking carriage, Doris saw Evelyn's haggard and sorrowful face from crying. She suddenly remembered the series of questions Roddy had asked her, as well as Roddy's mutterings to himself, "Don't worry. You guys are digging your own graves, digging your own graves." Duke finally led the team to catch up to Roddy. It was not only because he had figured it out, but more importantly, he saw Akasha, who was beside Roddy, casually pointing at himself and the injured soldiers of Icica. When the light shone, the injuries of the soldiers quickly healed, and they regained their ability to fight and stood up again. After the church was destroyed by Lasman, the healing divine spells had not appeared in the public's eyes for a long time. Moreover, Bindu was a country on horseback, and could be considered as a barren land of magic. Therefore, they had never seen such magical skills before. The inexplicable reverence in his heart and the fear of the howls of the monsters in the distance made Duke hesitate. When Davian and the others killed a few more nearby children, he finally made up his mind and led the team to catch up. That was because Roddy had used his unintentional actions to prove that his team was truly powerful. The place where Miranda and the others died was not far from the Colomere Magic Tower. It did not take long for Roddy to reach the bottom of the tower. Houdini immediately rushed into the magic tower and sprinted in the direction of the command center. Of course, as a magus with no status, Houdini was stopped not long after he entered. According to the rules of the magic tower, it was impossible for non-combatants to enter the core command center without saying a word. If he wanted to see Jeremy, he had to go through many levels of reporting and approval. Houdini, who was very familiar with this trick, had no time to wait for them to inform him. He immediately waved his hand and chased away the magic apprentices who tried to stop him with a spell. Then, he cast lightning spell and rushed upstairs. His action naturally triggered the alarm mechanism in the magic tower. In the midst of all kinds of alarms, Houdini broke through 3 checkpoints in a row and finally stopped in the middle of the tower. It was a small team of sorcerers who stopped him here. At the same time, the defensive magic circle in the magic tower was not a joke. He could feel that the spells in several traps were ready. "I want to see Chancellor Jeremy. I want to deliver an important message. The messenger of the Kingdom of Karen has a way to deal with the big guy outside. If we really want to kill it, we must do it now." The Kingdom of Karen? The guard sorcerer who stopped Houdini knew who he was. He frowned and said, "When did you become the messenger of the Kingdom of Karen?" "Master Houdini, this is a time of war. What you have done now is enough to be punished by the law. It doesn't matter. I just need you to deliver this message to Chancellor Jeremy. This is the only way. Trust me." Houdini's tone was very sincere. However, the man did not seem to believe him. The battle sorcerer raised his hand and stopped him from continuing. "Master Houdini, for the sake of your previous status as a counselor, it's not too late for you to leave now. Otherwise, I will arrest you according to the rules of the magic tower. Arrest me is not a problem. I just need you to deliver this message. Otherwise, why do you think I rushed here? There is no time now. Chancellor Jeremy and the highest level of the council have gone to the top of the tower. All the crises will be solved. So, Master Houdini, you don't have to worry about this." Top of the tower was a special code. The top of the Colomere Magic Tower was an area where magic circles were concentrated to deal with external enemies. If all the magisters went to the top of the tower, it meant that the council was ready to launch a powerful attack. Even Houdini hesitated for a moment. There were more than 40 magisters in the council, including at least 8 extremely powerful seniors. Could they really defeat the monster? As he was thinking, a violent vibration came from the bottom of his feet. Even Houdini, who was inside the tower, could feel the surrounding elements being stripped and condensed. He and the sorcerers in front of him turned their heads and looked out of the window. At this moment, the outside of the Colomere Magic Tower was as bright as day. The magisters at the top of the tower were chanting spells at the same time. There were a total of 29 magisters present, 6 of whom were powerful beings who had advanced to level 50. At this moment, they each stood in a designated area. The dense waves of energy became more and more violent. As the 6 white-haired archmages raised their wands at the same time, a fireball as bright as a miniature sun suddenly condensed above everyone's head. The giant flame blast, was actually beyond the scope of a flame blast spell. It was similar in appearance to a flame blast spell, but in fact, it was a giant bomb made of energy. As the old man who used to fish by the sea pointed his wand forward, the orange fireball instantly began to accelerate, flying straight towards the giant monster that had already reached the shore. This attack was much faster than the light ball cast by the magic tower. In the face of such an attack, the parent of the ancient sea monster used the same trick. It instantly raised a large number of tentacles in an attempt to block the attack. However, the old man who controlled the giant flame blast had already anticipated this. He raised his wand with full concentration and suddenly directed the trajectory of the fireball in the distance to suddenly move upwards. Then, the tip of the wand pointed in the air, causing the fireball to suddenly split into 10 parts in the air. The tip of the wand pointed downwards, and the scattered fireballs without hesitation smashed towards the head of the parent. The tentacles desperately tried to block the fireballs, but the fireballs were too fast. The tentacles that stretched out with all their might could only block 3 of the fireballs. The remaining 7 exploded on the head. Chapter 7:11. These explosions blasted a large pit of 3 to 4 meters deep on the surface of the ancient sea beast's body. Although it looked shocking, it did not actually hurt its muscles and bones. However, the mages at the top of the tower did not think of killing the enemy in one shot. Seeing that this move was effective, they gathered their magic power again and prepared for a second attack, but because of the distance, they did not notice that at this moment, many of the subsidiary bodies, scattered all over the city, were already running in the direction of the mother body. Ignoring the terrain, they jumped over the dock, stepped on the corpses of the murlocs and humans, and jumped into the sea. Then, they quickly swam to the bottom of the mother body and directly drilled into the gaps of the countless tentacles. In the process of swimming upstream, they quickly found the holes hidden at the end of the tentacles. For the subsidiary bodies, this was their nest. After successfully drilling into the holes of the flesh, these monsters with various kinds of magic crystal in their bodies were squeezed by the sticky flesh all the way and were quickly sucked into the abdomen of the mother body by a suction force. After that, the subsidiary bodies spat out the things they had swallowed before like chewing cud, directly pouring them into a deep hole in the body of the mother body. At this time, the quality of the magic crystal they had collected was mostly not good, but as hundreds of subsidiary bodies continued to spit out magic crystal of all sizes, soon there were thousands of pieces, including the corpses of Miranda and Jill that had been swallowed by the subsidiary bodies, as well as various kinds of magic tools that contained magical fluctuations, and even damaged puppet cores and animal skins and bones that they had stolen from the shop. These things quickly piled up into a small hill. Below this deep hole was the digestive organ of the mother body. As the crunching sound of chewing continued to be heard, the surface of the body faintly emitted obscure light patterns. And the blackened wounds from the bombardment also quickly healed with the fluctuations of these light patterns. The flesh on the surface of the entire body of the giant beast began to change in large patches. The previously dark brown skin slowly turned dark red. This change was announced in less than a minute or two. But the mages casting spells in the distance did not realize this. Seeing that the previous attack was effective, they had already condensed a second giant flame burst and imitated the previous attack pattern, directly smashing the bright fireball over. This time, the fireball was split into 6, obviously to increase the damage of each fireball. The giant beast raised its tentacles again and barely managed to block 3 of the tentacles. The remaining 3 exploded with a loud boom, and the sound was even more obvious than before. However, when the smoke dissipated, the mages suddenly realized that apart from being charred black, there was not even a dent on the opponent's body. Fire-resistant skin, the magisters at the top of the tower immediately cast a detection spell and made a deduction. This scene stunned the mages. It was the first time they had heard of a magical beast that could change its body so quickly like a chameleon. Moreover, it could also produce a strong resistance to spell attacks. While they were looking at each other, rings of light appeared on the surface of the giant beast in the distance. These rings of light moved to the top of the giant beast's body one after another. It looked exactly the same as when the magic tower used the energy light balls to bombard the giant beast. "Quick! Prepare to defend!" President Jeremy shouted immediately. In fact, even without his reminder, the mages had also felt the sudden elemental fluctuations in the distance. In the next moment, a hole suddenly split open in the center of the giant beast's body, and with a bang, a giant flesh tumor with a dark red halo shot out. Compared to the magic tower's energy attack, this attack was more of a physical one. This was because the trajectory of this flesh ball was completely like a catapult's parabola. However, what made everyone's hair stand on end was that the landing point of the meatball was unbiased and was heading straight for the top of the magic tower. In the process of flying for 20 to 30 seconds, the magic tower quickly opened all its defensive enchantments. At the same time, the mages used all their strength to condense a conical shield. Just as the shield was formed, the flesh ball smashed into the shield with a bang. In the midst of the flashing light, it instantly pierced through the hemispherical shield, and then fiercely crashed into the Magister's shield. Bang! With a muffled sound, the flesh ball shattered into countless pieces of flesh on the shield, and like rain, they scattered around the magic tower. The mages were sweating profusely, but when they saw that the shield they maintained with all their strength did not shatter in the end, they were greatly relieved. But when they looked to their left and right, they found that the pieces of flesh that fell to the ground actually started to burn, either igniting the buildings or burning the soldiers who were careless. In an instant, the magic tower became a sea of fire, like a hell on earth. What should we do? Not only is this thing's defense terrifying, it can even counterattack. Continue to fight. Even if we die, we have to blow it up. Can you guarantee that you can break through its protection like the first time? The mages were a little flustered. They did not expect the enemy to be able to counterattack from a few kilometers away, and at the same time, easily resist the collective spells of nearly 30 mages. If the enemy threw a few more flesh balls, no one could say for sure whether the Colomere magic tower would be destroyed. Fortunately, the mother in the distance did not seem to have any intention of continuing to attack. After throwing the flesh ball, it returned to its previous calm state, but the mages could all feel that the magic waves emitted by the enemy were much stronger than before. "It is growing? We must stop it. Stop my ass. Our army has already been defeated." A counselor cursed, but then his tone changed. He pointed below the magic tower and said, "Whose army is that? They are building a defensive line." Hearing this, President Jeremy was the first to look down from the top of the tower. He saw that there was a team below using magic to extinguish the flames around them. At the same time, the soldiers in shiny silver armor actually boldly formed a line of defense, easily crushing all the murlocs that tried to rush over, and continuously taking in the troops that fled from the port. Because the magic tower's magic circle was being repaired, the fire covering the ground had been interrupted for half an hour. Without the protection of magic, it was difficult for the fleeing soldiers to regroup. But now, this team that suddenly appeared out of nowhere easily reversed the situation, at least partially stabilizing the defensive line. The mages on the top of the tower could not help but feel a little relieved, but when they looked up into the distance, their joy immediately disappeared. President Jeremy stared at the giant beast that seemed to have fallen silent, his eyes also a little blank. What should we do next? The battle below Colomere was far more intense than the top of the tower. The mutated murlocs were taller than ordinary people, but when they ran and charged, they always hunched their bodies. Therefore, when fighting face to face, Erwin and the others had an obvious height advantage. Fighting from a height was more efficient because the sharp claws and teeth of the murlocs were useless against the magic armor of the best quality. These barbarian soldiers had super strong stamina and strength. When dealing with the disorganized murlocs who only knew how to run around blindly, it was like fighting a dumb roe deer in the woods. Just one slash on the head and it was over. When encountering a group of enemies that rushed over, Sylvia and Marinsura's fireballs would blow the unlucky ones up into the sky in advance. Hence, in just a few short minutes, more than 400 murlocs were harvested. At the same time, more than 200 fleeing soldiers and 18 exhausted mages were also taken in. However, this was not Rhodey's so-called method to deal with the ancient sea beast. At that moment, he was standing at the back of the team and could not help but look at the magic tower anxiously. If they did not have the support of the sorcerers from the magic tower, they would not even be able to think about dealing with that big guy in the distance. What frustrated him the most was that the magic tower had attacked twice and was almost flattened by the gigantic beast. Obviously, Houdini did not succeed. If this continues, there will be no other way. Roddy frowned. He was about to call Marinsura and force them to the top of the tower to negotiate with the giant beast, but at this moment, Naife suddenly said, "That thing's color is changing. What's going on? Outside or inside?" Roddy knew Naife's ability, so he immediately asked. Naife stared at it for a few seconds and said, "The inside is like a hodgepodge with all kinds of colors, but the outside is all dark red, and it's getting brighter and brighter. It's evolving." Roddy said with certainty, "If we can't kill it in one attack, it will become stronger and more difficult to deal with. So we have to get rid of it as soon as possible, or else it will really become invincible." He didn't want to wait any longer. He turned around and was about to find Houdini, but he happened to see the enraged great mage being chased out of the tower by a team of mages. Roddy stepped forward and was about to ask Houdini, but he saw Houdini yelling at the mages, "Go to hell!" Then he turned around and rushed to the front of the magic tower. He pointed his wand at the sky and cast the tracing spell, a bright and complicated rune in the sky. According to the original process of casting the spell, the rune would show the current position of the target in the sky after the spell was cast. However, Houdini stopped the spell halfway and waved his wand to reassemble the white rune in the sky, which had not yet dissipated, into a few words that appeared one after another. Roddy, the messenger of the kingdom of Karen. Know how to deal with such an enemy. Bottom of the tower. Houdini. Because the tracing spell could only be used 300 meters above the ground, everyone on the top of the tower could clearly see the words just now. However, these sorcerers all frowned. The monster in front of them was so powerful that they had never heard of it before. Had the kingdom of Karen dealt with it before? The most powerful sorcerers obviously snorted at these words. They immediately said, "I know the kingdom of Karen's construction puppets are very advanced, but it doesn't mean they are stronger than us. Jeremy, adjust the magic circle and prepare for the third attack." Wait. Jeremy looked at the last line of words that was gradually disappearing. Countless images flashed through his mind: the cobalt ore on the fire bolt, the charged crystal displayed in front of everyone at the auction house, the back view of Roddy in the arena, and the two papers that he was still reading in the afternoon. Marine mutation research. He was still wondering why Roddy could suddenly produce such detailed experimental data. When he saw Houdini's handwriting, everything suddenly became clear. The kingdom of Karen, where Roddy was from, had probably faced a similar situation. Otherwise, he would not have been able to write such an interesting paper in such a short time. The clues, speculations, and facts matched up one by one. Jeremy no longer hesitated. He turned around and said, "Be ready to defend at any time." Then he directly cast the levitation spell, and jumped down from the top of the tower. The other counselors and sorcerers looked at each other. Most of them were surprised that Jeremy actually believed Houdini. But Counselor Lodica, who was standing in the corner, narrowed his eyes. As the person who had personally ordered people to get rid of Roddy, he had never expected to see the name Roddy on such an occasion. What was even more unbelievable was that Houdini could actually get Jeremy to personally go and talk to him. Compared to his fear of Jeremy's identity as a speaker, Lodica was more worried about the solution to the crisis in front of him. What if Jeremy really listened to Roddy and really got rid of the ancient behemoth in front of him? At that time, the name Roddy would be shrouded in a layer of light. It could even be said that he would have a death exemption card in Lassyman. He would be able to do whatever he wanted. No matter what, Lodica did not want such a thing to become a reality. So, after a brief consideration, he immediately pretended to be exhausted and walked down from the top of the tower with a pale face, saying that he needed deep meditation to recover. The spell just now had indeed consumed a lot of energy. Although Lodica had the strength of a sorcerer, he was not a battlemage. So, his departure did not attract the attention of the surrounding mages. After all, everyone's attention was mainly focused on the giant beast in the distance. As time passed, the Murlocs who had rushed ashore had completely invaded the city of Duriel. The capital of Lassyman did not have a very classical inner and outer city wall design like the kingdom of Karen. Because of the mages' superstition about power, the city only had a circle of city walls on the northern part of the land. Because there were many cliffs on the side of the sea, the only entrance to the city was the port. So, there was no need to waste resources on building a city wall. But no one had thought that this city would be visited by a guy who reached up to 200 meters tall, and this guy had brought more than 20,000 Murlocs and more than 3,000 children to attack the city. So, an hour after they rushed into the city, the Murlocs finally began to pour in front of the Colomere magic tower in large numbers. "Stop them! Make sure to drag the wounded to the rear. We need reinforcements here. Cover with spells. Remember to protect yourself." Chapter 7:12. Little Khan Duke and his knights joined the battle without stopping. The other envoys who were lucky enough to escape also joined the defensive line built by Roddy after Akasha treated them. It wasn't because of their bravery, but because of Roddy's appearance, the positional warfare became much easier than they had imagined. Irwin and the others could definitely be said to be practiced in dealing with a large number of enemies who were charging blindly, and they cooperated very well. The infantry defended, the cavalry held their spears at the back, and the areas on both sides that couldn't be defended used magic to build bunkers. The rest of what they had to do was to repeatedly kill. Therefore, when the escaped mages regained their senses, they immediately learned from Sylvia and Merlin Sarah and started to continuously cast magic to build temporary walls and bunkers to protect the troops. Earth walls and ice walls were erected on the square below the magic tower, and the crisis of lacking combat power was immediately solved. As the magic circle on the magic tower was repaired, rounds of magic support began to fall from the sky again. The originally stressed soldiers could finally take a breather, and began to rotate the reserve troops. While all this was happening, Evelyn and Doris were sitting on the stone steps at the back of the defensive line in a daze. With half of the seal removed, they could only move their necks stiffly, and couldn't even stand up. The soldiers who kept running around them didn't realize that they were tied up, and only thought that they were unable to move because of their injuries. The troops of Essica had suffered heavy losses in the battle just now, and had long been separated to an unknown place. Evelyn was almost killed by the female worm, and if it wasn't for Akasha's healing spell, she would probably have died from the pain. When she found out that her life had been saved by Rhodey's team, she was in a trance. However, when she saw that the situation of the battle had stabilized, she suppressed the grief in her heart and quietly asked Doris what had happened. The answer she got finally made her realize how terrifying the young man not far away was. "Everything is a disguise. It's all fake. I can't see through him at all. Doris sounded depressed. She felt that she had wasted all these years. Coupled with the news of Miranda and Jill's death, her mood was extremely low. He seemed to know more about the plan to infect the Murlocs than we do, and he scolded me back then, saying that we were digging our own graves. Evelyn was originally distracted by the pain in her calf, but after hearing Doris's words, she was stunned for a moment. She then muttered to herself, "Digging his own grave. Did he know that we would encounter such an attack?" The deaths of Miranda and Jill had deeply affected the matriarch. She had already realized that the children would never attack them for no reason. So what was the problem? No matter how he thought about it, it could only be the spell that Miranda cast to expel the Murlocs. She and Doris had learned this spell after receiving a book from the Royal Magic Temple in Icica, and the one who made them learn this spell was none other than Her Majesty, Queen Talia. This spell was indeed effective against the Murlocs, but it had an unusual attraction to the ferocious children. Is this a coincidence? If it's not a coincidence, the sudden attack of fear made her feel as if needles were pricking her back. Cold sweat almost immediately flowed down her forehead. As soon as this thought popped up in his mind, many unintentional details became strong evidence to support this judgment. Especially the words that Miranda had mentioned when talking about Her Majesty Talia's reward. As the leaders of several major forces in the country, why would they suddenly gather to participate in such a mission? Icica had never been a country where power was concentrated in the royal family. The distribution of power was similar to that of the Kingdom of Karen. The clans controlled their respective territories, and the king commanded all the matriarchs in name. Evelyn thought about it carefully. If the unexpected factor of Roddy hadn't been involved in this incident, then Doris would have left with them, and there was a high chance that she would be surrounded and killed by the children. If the team was wiped out, what would the situation in the country be like? Who would benefit the most from this? She would never have thought that Talia, who was almost 15 years younger than her, would have such a vicious mind. But when all the clues were connected, Evelyn suddenly realized that she had made a very stupid mistake in politics. One would end up very miserably if they underestimated anyone. And now it seemed that Roddy, whom they had originally tried to use, had unexpectedly become their benefactor instead. Fate sometimes liked to play jokes. Evelyn leaned against the cold stone wall somewhat dejectedly. Her eyes were unfocused as she whispered, "Doris, we might not be able to return to Icica. Will Her Majesty send someone to save us?" Doris clearly still had fantasies about Her Majesty, but her words made Evelyn laugh bitterly. "Save us? Even if we are lucky enough to return to our country, we will probably die for some inexplicable reason. Miranda and Jill didn't die in an accident. Her Majesty wants us all to die here to achieve her goal." Her words made Doris confused, but the latter was not a fool. She understood what she meant after some thought. The bone-chilling cold made Doris panic a little. They had become abandoned pawns. In front of these forces, they were obviously ignored like garbage. "Then, what can we do now?" Doris asked somewhat anxiously. She was afraid of death and absolutely did not want to be left on a dangerous battlefield. "We have no choice. We must choose a side to rely on. It's either the Parliament or the Kingdom of Karen." Evelyn also became decisive at this moment. She struggled to move her imprisoned body and moved closer to Doris. "The only thing that can prevent us from being blamed now is the envoy of the Kingdom of Karen." Doris nodded repeatedly. She knew that expressing her loyalty to Roddy should be the most urgent matter now. However, when the two of them found each other in the crowd, they were so shocked that they could not close their mouth. Because the chairman of the Lassiman Parliament, Jeremy, was standing beside Roddy at this moment. It was obvious that he was listening to something important. This chairman's expression and manner were extremely serious, but he kept nodding his head in agreement, completely like a magic apprentice being scolded. The way to deal with the ancient sea monsters was not as simple as bombarding them directly. Roddy did not have time to beat around the bush with Jeremy. He went straight to the point and explained the concept of parent and subsidiary. At the same time, he explained the battle plan that he had given. Combined with what was happening at the moment, Jeremy immediately realized that this was indeed the only feasible plan. He immediately put away his arrogance and seriously memorized everything that Roddy said. He very decisively agreed to Roddy's battle plan, and then said, "I'll go and prepare immediately. It may take 10 minutes. The battle plan will be under your command. The Parliament will follow your instructions." After saying that, he flew to the top of the tower with the levitation spell. Obviously, he had gone to inform the mages at the top of the tower. Roddy was very surprised. He originally thought that the most optimistic situation would be to let the other party accept the battle plan. He did not expect that the other party would directly give him the command. This was indeed different from the bureaucratic rule that he had in mind. After all, we are all mages. We know what's important. Roddy could not help but sigh that talking to smart people really saved him energy. He turned his head to look at the battlefield, where the battle line was stable, and shouted to Akasha, "Remember to save your magic power. There will be a wave of attack later." "No problem." Akasha waved her hand, and then cast a holy shield for Nephi, who was beside her. Nephi was not idle at the moment. She was concentrating on controlling the puppet to fight in the front line. With the rechargeable crystal as the energy source, the endurance of the puppet Type 3 was very amazing, so Nephi was fighting almost without any magic power consumption. The only thing she needed to do was to occasionally cast a shield for the puppet to protect it. After confirming that the situation of the battle was temporarily stable, Roddy turned his eyes to the mission panel in front of him, and found that the description of Demon Disaster had changed. "You bravely decided to face the ancient behemoth from the deep sea, but simple courage can't defeat the enemy. The enemy that is constantly getting stronger is far more terrifying than you think. You still have a chance to escape, or it will be too late for regret. Mission completion requirement: defeat the ancient behemoth 0/1 mission reward. Skills: Demon Deterrence, Gaze of Fear, Sacrifice, EXP, 4560,000. As Roddy changed his choice, the mission had obviously taken a different path. Compared to the previous reward of only a little more than 10,000 EXP, the difficulty of facing the ancient sea monster had obviously increased by several levels, and the reward was also very shocking. This was because when Roddy glanced at the 3 skills, he found that they were all epic skills with purple borders. Demon Deterrence consumes 1500 magic power casting range, 50 meters cooldown time, 10 minutes effect. Intimidate a demon and freeze it in place for 3 seconds. Gaze of Fear consumes 50 magic power per second casting range, 5 meters effect. When the target's eyes are fixed, the target will feel fear. Sacrifice consumes sacrifice casting time, 1 minute effect. Different effects will be produced according to the type of sacrifice. However, at this time, Roddy was not going to stand there and think about how to use these skills. He closed the interface and rushed to the side of the fire crossbow. He raised his hand and lifted the boxes of rechargeable crystal down. At the same time, he shouted to Merlin Sarah, who was not far away, "Help me modify the magic circle. We don't have much time left." After blasting away a group of merepeople with 2 big fireballs, Merlin Sarah turned around and began to rearrange the nodes on the magic circle according to Roddy's request. These were originally the latest weapons and floating magic circles in Elson City, but now they had changed their nature under Merlin Sarah's hands. The densely packed rechargeable crystal on the nodes looked spectacular. At this time, Roddy had already turned around and walked straight to Doris and Evelyn, who were thinking hard about what to do. "Lord Roddy, we are willing to pledge our loyalty to you. Doris and Evelyn expressed their stance without hesitation. Because they were imprisoned, they could only sit on the ground and bow to Roddy. Roddy was not surprised at all. As long as they were not idiots, they would definitely understand what was going on after being besieged by the female worms. So, he did not waste time and said directly, "You can pledge your loyalty to me. Now, I have a place for you to show your loyalty. If you do as I say, I will accept your loyalty and protect your lives. We will do as you say. We will listen to Lord Roddy." They knew that they had no other choice at this time, so they immediately agreed. But as soon as they finished speaking, Roddy's request made their eyes widen at the same time. Chapter 7:13. The Murlocs screamed as they charged towards the front of the Colomere magic tower. The three of them, who were hidden under the night barrier, stared at the glowing magic tower in a daze. What the hell is going on? Looks like we're in big trouble. Just now, the Magister on the magic tower was actually having a magic duel with the monster. This is something that has never happened in the history of Duriel. Stop sighing, you two. The assassin Ethan had the best eyesight. He frowned and said, "There are too many monsters out there. We can't leave even if we want to, and we can't find the target now. What should we do?" The three of them originally wanted to catch up with Roddy's team on horseback, but they encountered the female worms that fell from the sky not long after. After the three of them killed two of them, they realized that if they continued to chase after Roddy, they would definitely encounter more similar monsters. So, they simply stopped and found a high point to hide. This way, they would be much safer. Let's not move for now. The mission target actually said that he has a way to deal with this monster, so he should be near the magic tower. He hasn't left the city yet. That's strange. The council didn't deal with the enemy, but instead sent an outsider to join in the fun? They also saw the words that Houdini typed in the sky, so they were curious. If Roddy was a sorcerer from Lassiman, all this could be attributed to patriotism. But a foreign emissary that they had never heard of actually rushed to put himself in danger. It was really hard to understand. If he dies on the battlefield, it'll save us a lot of trouble. Sorcerer Breton used his staff to maintain the barrier. The three of them were obviously very good at hiding themselves. Under the cover of the inconspicuous night barrier, the ancient sea monsters and the murlocs or female worms that wandered on the street did not notice their existence. What do we do now? Wait for the opportunity. If there's no opportunity, wait for the next one. This sentence had always been the standard for the three of them. Since the situation was tense and the target was nowhere to be seen, they would not make a move and wait for the enemy to exhaust themselves. For assassins, as long as they maintained the initiative of "the enemy is in the light while we are in the dark," there would always be an opportunity. Okay. No problem. After the tacit agreement, the three of them returned to silence. However, when they quietly looked at the sea monster not far away, they all shrank their bodies. The mountain-like body in the darkness seemed to have changed again. As the second and third batch of female worms returned to the mother, more energy and magic crystal were absorbed, the ancient sea monster's body became brighter again. Rings of light began to move from the bottom to the top. If one was close enough, one could clearly see that the tentacles that had been lost to block the gigantic flame blast and the light ball were rapidly recovering. At the same time, the newly grown tentacles were clearly longer and more agile than before. Its body, which had been soaking in the sea, began to move towards the shore at a faster speed due to the increase in its strength. The water flowed to the sides, and what followed was the sound of the pier's wooden buildings being crushed. The creaking sounds from afar were continuous, but they were soon replaced by an even louder buzzing sound compared to the previous beast. The speed at which it gathered energy was much faster this time. After the white light flashed 7 or 8 times, A larger orange beast shot out, leaving a long trail in the air as it headed straight for the Colomere Magic Tower. The mages at the top of the Magic Tower were on high alert. They had already prepared 3 layers of shields. However, they did not expect the beast to suddenly explode the moment it got close to the Magic Tower, splitting into more than 10 small objects. In order to ensure its strength, the shield used to block the projectiles could not cover the entire Magic Tower at all. In addition, it was cast by many people, so there was no time to change it at this moment. The group of mages could only watch as 5 or 6 of the projectiles hit the unprotected tower. Boom, boom, boom. Broken rocks and dirt flew everywhere. The beast relied on its speed and momentum. Other than 2 of the beast bouncing off the curved edge, the other 3 smashed 3 large holes in the Colomere. The beast had a diameter of more than 4 meters after it split, and was more than 10 times more powerful than a normal catapult. Coupled with the magical waves it carried, the tower was set ablaze after the impact. Screams and wails could be heard. Just as the mages were about to retaliate, they realized that the beast in the distance had spat out another beast. The 2 beasts were shot out less than 20 seconds apart. The mages immediately felt an indescribable pressure. In order to prevent the enemy from launching a scattered attack like before, the archmages immediately organized a larger shield to defend themselves. However, this time, the lightning bolt did not split. Instead, it maintained its complete form and ruthlessly smashed into the shield that was weakened due to the increased surface area. Crack! The shield shattered and the beast continued to charge at the top of the Magic Tower. Spread out! At this moment, none of the mages had the time to cast their spells. It took at least 5 seconds to cast a spell in a group. In this situation, who would dare say that they could block a beast with a diameter of more than 15 meters? So they used their life-saving skills without hesitation. Not a single one of the more than 20 figures scattered at the top of the Magic Tower was hit, but with a boom, the top of the Colomere Magic Tower was smashed into pieces. Under the violent impact, 1/5 of the top of the Magic Tower was shattered into pieces. As the top of the Magic Tower was the area where a large number of core magic circles and command rooms were densely packed, the Magic Tower almost instantly rendered most of the magic circles in the Magic Tower useless. The apprentices and servants who could not dodge in time were killed without a whole corpse. The spells that were supposed to relieve the pressure on the front line were all suspended. The lack of firepower immediately made the Murlocs' attack more severe. More importantly, although most people were used to atheism, the erection of the Magic Tower was undoubtedly a spiritual totem in their hearts. Now that the top of the Magic Tower was smashed, the flashing lights and magic circles were all extinguished. The effect was not as simple as the magic shield disappearing, but the morale of the Murloc had once again collapsed. Roddy, who was under the Magic Tower, could clearly hear the sorrowful cries and screams of the mages around him. He even saw some grabbing their hair and crying out loud. All of this was no different from the cries of believers when they saw a holy statue being smashed. So at this moment, the only ones who remained calm on the battlefield were the surviving envoys from the other countries. What do we do now? We can't hold on much longer. Little Konduk, who was wearing leather armor, asked loudly. His line of defense was right next to Erwin and the others. The barbarians could block the enemies, but it was much more difficult for them to defend. Therefore, they had no choice but to turn their attention to Roddy. Request reinforcements. Requesting backup. At the same time, a few other people shouted at the same time. The shouts of Ulu. This was because only Roddy's troops were able to completely crush the enemy in terms of strength. Wherever they really couldn't hold on, as long as David's mobile cavalry team made around, they would be able to withstand the bombardment of a few mages. Akasha's continuous healing spells greatly alleviated the damage on the battlefield. Not to mention, Marinsula and Sylvia led the dozen or so mages who had regained their composure from time to clear out the enemy. To put it simply, if Roddy's troops weren't running around and giving commands, the so-called line of defense would be a joke. Strength was obtained through fighting. Without the Lassiman Council's participation, everyone who participated in the battle could feel where the soul of the entire army was. Roddy frowned. He reached out his hand to brush off the dust that had fallen on his head. He realized that if he didn't use some special methods, it would be difficult for him to hold on. Those who managed to escape from the port were basically all mages who had exhausted their magic power. They could not be said to be of much help to the front line. They could only maintain and repair the ice walls and earth walls that had been constructed. Looking for reinforcements? There were no reinforcements at all, unless… Akasha! He suddenly shouted, then pointed at his finger. Akasha immediately understood that he was referring to the light of arcane magic, revival skill on her ring, or rather, the necromancy spell that she had never used before. With the increasing number of enemies, this was indeed the only way to temporarily strengthen the line of defense. Akasha originally didn't want to use this skill in Lassiman, but now that the situation was critical, and with Roddy's permission, she no longer had any qualms. Ignoring the shock of the soldiers around her, she rushed to the front of the line. She reached out and put the white scepter into the pocket of her backpack. At the same time, she reached out and pulled out the bone staff from the necromancer Ugisa. Waves that were completely different from divine spells swept out. The first spell she cast was the Resurrection of the Dead skill that she had learned on her own. Then, she raised her palm and cast Light of Arcane Magic, Revival on the corpse-strewn battlefield. Chapter 7:14. Without waiting for fear to spread among the troops, a blood-curdling scream suddenly rang out from the crowd of Murlocs. A blue-gilled Murloc who was charging at the front was about to pounce on a soldier who was holding a battle shield. However, his leg was grabbed by a sharp claw that came from below. Before he could react, his entire body was dragged to the ground. An intense pain assaulted him. He turned his head and saw one of his kind opening his mouth that was filled with sharp teeth and biting towards him. Poochie! A similar situation happened around the battle line at the same time. The soldiers who were bracing themselves to resist suddenly felt that the densely packed Murloc in front of them seemed to have suddenly reduced in number. When they came to their senses, they found that there were only a few Murloc rushing to the front of the battle line. Looking ahead, hundreds of resurrected Murloc dragged their bodies covered in blood, and actually blocked those of their own kind who were rushing at them. Akasha did not simply cast Arcane Light, Recovery, and then turned around and left. She then raised the bone staff, and a pale gray light suddenly bloomed. The wounds of those resurrected Murloc began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. In terms of the degree of recovery, it had already far exceeded the recovery effect of Akasha's powerful healing on ordinary people. The most exaggerated thing was that those resurrected Murloc, whose bones were shattered, and even whose heads were smashed out of shape, almost recovered under the effect of this wave of healing. They yelled and pounced on those of their kind who had a confused look on their faces. After being demonized, the only distinguishing ability of the Murloc, who had lost their minds, was not to attack their own kind. They could not distinguish whether the same kind in front of them was an undead creature or a demon, so most of them were caught off guard and had their throats ripped open by a claw. When they fell to the ground with blood spurting out of their mouths, their huge eyes were filled with deep confusion. Seeing that the battle line was under control, Akasha turned around and ran to another battle line. After the skill's cooldown, she cast Arcane Light, Recovery again, and more than 300 Murloc joined the battlefield. After repeatedly healing and summoning for 3 times, Akasha suddenly drank a bottle of potion. When she turned around and scanned the battlefield, she saw that many people were frozen in the battle line like statues. They were panting heavily and looking at each other, as if they could not accept this fact. "What are you waiting for? Quick, rotate and rest." It was not until they heard Roddy's shout that they gradually recovered from the shock. After casting the spell 3 times, nearly 800 murlocs stood up and joined the battle line, almost immediately giving the exhausted soldiers a chance to take a breather. Although these resurrected murlocs weren't wearing any armor, they were able to easily block the other murlocs that were charging at them since they weren't being attacked. Their lethality was far beyond imagination. They were even more efficient than the mages who kept casting spells. However, Roddy was not interested in being amazed like the others. At this time, he was directing the magic apprentices who were continuously moving boxes out of the magic tower. As the core of Lassiman, the Columnar magic tower contained an astonishing amount of magic crystal. Therefore, a large number of crystals of various sizes could be moved out in a short period of time. Why should we listen to him? Who knows if what that guy said is true or not? But the problem now is that we don't have a solution, and his solution sounds the most likely one. The white-haired archmage argued with Jeremy from the top of the tower to the bottom. Like him, there were a few other mages who were skeptical of Jeremy's decision. However, the other archmages who had followed them all the way down were obviously on Jeremy's side. The two groups of mages had different opinions. When they reached the bottom of the tower, they collectively surrounded Roddy. Roddy didn't have time to talk nonsense with them. He just continued to say to Jeremy, "Do as I said. Magic crystal should be sealed and connected together. Make this kind of sphere." As he spoke, he pointed at Marinsara, who had already finished modifying the magic circle brought from Ifta. Then, she used a spell to glue the large pile of magic crystal in the wooden box together, forming a sparkling sphere the size of a soccer ball. Then, she sealed it with a protection barrier. What does this mean? The archmages were a little dazed. At the side, Jeremy explained, "The solution that Envoy Roddy provided us is to break through the enemy from within. You want to blow it up? Magic crystal stacked together can't possibly explode." The group of archmages all had professional sensitivity. Once the solution was mentioned, they ignored Roddy and collectively surrounded Jeremy. "How do we send it in? How do we break through it? Those monsters with tentacles are collecting energy. They are continuously sending similar energy bodies back to the parent body. That's why that monster is continuously becoming stronger. It can directly absorb energy to strengthen itself? The strategy of attacking the top of the tower just now proves that it has high intelligence. What kind of monster is this? It's too shocking. If only we could estimate its conversion rate. Brits, now is not the time to discuss academics." The other two mages hurriedly stopped this mage who was in high spirits from asking questions. This was because once he started talking, he was completely oblivious to everything around him. It was as if he had forgotten that there were giant beasts in the distance that were ready to continue bombarding them at any time. Jeremy quickly continued, "Envoy Roddy plans to seal a large number of magic crystal and let those monsters bring it into the parent body. When it starts to convert energy, he will activate the air expansion magic circle that he prepared. This magic circle will initially consume the crystal energy it carries, but after it expands to a certain range, it will produce a critical chain effect with other magic crystal in the same area." "You mean, deliberately let the magic circle go out of control and cause an elemental storm?" The mages looked at each other and immediately realized that this was feasible. This was because it involved several basic theories that had been proven, such as the elemental linkage effect, point mass expansion theory, and so on. However, this was only feasible in theory, and there were many difficulties in actual practice. The initial air expansion magic circle has to reach the critical threshold within 10 seconds. This is very difficult to achieve. It's not difficult to achieve. Jeremy pointed at the densely packed, charged crystals on the stone slab of the magic circle and said in a low voice, "This is not an ordinary magic crystal. It may only take a second to reach the critical point at full power." Noticing this, the mages gulped. They knew the auction price of the charged crystals, and there were 64 of them on the magic circle. It was really driving them crazy. How do we activate it? Do we use a countdown? How do we calculate the timing of the activation? Jeremy did not have time to ask these questions. Roddy ran over and replied, "I have to control the timing of the activation because the path inside its body is too long. If we do not activate it at the critical point, all our efforts will be in vain." He then pointed at the air expansion magic circle towards Jeremy. "I need a device that can activate the magic circle from afar, similar to the one used to control the construction puppet. I can improve it now. The furthest distance is probably around 800 meters. Jeremy estimated the distance and gave a more conservative figure. This meant that the magic circle could only be activated at a distance of 800 meters in front of the giant beast. But Roddy immediately agreed. "Then hurry up and modify it, we don't have much time." The mages around looked at each other, not knowing what to say. This kind of mission sounded like a suicide mission. Even the strongest magus wouldn't think that they would be able to come back alive after running within 800 meters of the gigantic beast. Thinking back to the frightening attack that had directly smashed the top of the tower, who knew if the enemy would have any more powerful attacks? But then again, this was related to the life and death of Duriel. Even if there was a sacrifice, Rasman should have sent someone to take it. How could a foreign ambassador put himself in danger? Even though many of these mages were politicians, and self-preservation had long become their instinct, as the highest-level managers of a country, their ideology would not be blurred at a time like this. Hence, a few mages immediately stood up and objected. "Young man, I think it's hard for you to even rush in and protect yourself. This kind of thing should be done by old bones like us. Just tell us what to do." "Well, what are you doing? You think I can't see that you've used up all your magic? Ambassador Roddy, tell me." These people were indeed the true pillars of Rasman. Roddy glanced at them and found that they were all above level 45 mages, and all of them were battle mages. The political and academic mages did not jump out to express their opinions, which made Roddy sigh at the awareness of Rasman's mages. Not everyone had the spirit of sacrifice and dedication, but when it was necessary, those who were qualified would never back down. "To be honest, I don't want to rush to my death. But the problem now is that my ability allows me to see the internal condition of this monster's body, so I can determine when to activate the magic circle. Respected magisters, if any of you have this ability, I am willing to give up my position to you." Roddy had just activated Witcher's vision, and looked from afar for a while. The pathways in the mother's body were intricate and complicated, and the core chamber was located in a very well-hidden place. If he did not monitor the air expansion magic circle, it would be very difficult to determine its location. Because of this, X-ray was the key to completing the mission. Although Naifei in the team had a similar ability, how could he let Naifei take the risk? The mages were stunned. Although they were battle mages of different types, X-ray was beyond the requirements of their abilities. Some mages tried to cast spells on the spot, but they quickly shook their heads to show that they could not do anything. Obviously, this mission was not something that could be completed with just strength, and Roddy did not intend to be a hero by himself. He pointed at the monster in the distance and explained, "If you are willing, please try your best to distract the monster when I approach it. Although this monster is strong against large targets, within a range of 1,000 meters, it will not pose a threat to an individual. You can rest assured about this." Chapter 7:15. So far, most of the mages had obviously accepted Roddy's solution. What happened next was much simpler. At least 18 mages quickly joined in to help Merlin Sarah and started to glue the magic crystal into balls. Soon, over 4,000 magic crystal of different sizes were piled up from the boxes that were continuously being transported out of the magic tower. Under the flickering light of spells, dozens of magic crystal balls were quickly formed. Roddy did not stay idle either. He quickly walked to the pale Doris and Evelyn and said in a low voice, "I only have one thing to say, there is no turning back." The two Tuck women looked at each other and knew that they had no choice now. They lowered their heads and said, "We will agree to anything." Roddy did not speak any more nonsense. The two of them had just been released from their shackles. Doris had also put on a long robe, so the two of them did not show any abnormalities when they walked in front of the group of mages. The monsters will continue to strengthen themselves, so we do not have much time. Earlier on the way here, I found that Messenger Evelyn's team could use mental spells to drive away the murlocs, but the side effect of this spell would attract the subsidiary bodies. This almost caused their entire team to be annihilated. Roddy's words were equivalent to clearing the identity of Evelyn and the others, making the Lassiman Council believe that the whole thing had nothing to do with them. Evelyn and Doris did not expect Roddy to resolve their worries as soon as he arrived. They felt relieved, and their tense expressions finally relaxed a little. At the same time, they felt grateful for their decision just now. In order to let the air expansion circle and the magic crystal balls enter the parent body, we must attract the subsidiary bodies over. So now I need the help of the two messengers. This is what we should do. On the surface, Evelyn was still the leader of the Icica diplomat group, so her answer was neither servile nor overbearing, and there was no loophole at all. The mages did not find any loophole and nodded in agreement. Doris took a deep breath and stepped forward to cast a spell. Evelyn, on the other hand, responded to Roddy's request and used her own magic circle to provide a range enhancement effect for Doris. In less than 10 seconds after Doris finished casting the spell, there was indeed a series of crackling noises. Roddy glanced at the tracking spell on the map pane, and found that there were more than 30 subsidiary bodies rushing over. At this time, the resurrected murlocs on the map pane had made a great contribution. Because they had not been identified, they had almost no casualties. They had easily built a line of defense in the front. More than 70% of the charging demonized murlocs fell in their hands, and the remaining 30% were easily taken care by the human soldiers. But when more than 30 subsidiary bodies rushed over, neither the murlocs nor the human soldiers could effectively stop their crazy footstep. The subsidiary bodies, that were running at full speed, even smashed through a few walls made of magic and rushed towards Doris without a care for their own safety. This scene made the two Tuck women's faces turn pale. Evelyn, who had experienced this scene before, was trembling all over. Miranda and Jill were killed on the spot under this terrifying attack. The huge psychological trauma even made it difficult for her to hold the slate magic circle in her hand, and it fell to the ground with a clang. The same thought appeared in both her and Doris's mind at the same time. I am the bait, and after using it, I can only wait for death. What are you waiting for? Retreat to the back. Hide, don't let them see you. In the midst of despair, Roddy's voice suddenly came. As he shouted, he reached out and pulled their shoulders, but it made them shiver at the same time. Doris and Evelyn looked at each other and took a deep breath. Then, they ran toward the back that was surrounded by soldiers. At least, they were not treated as sacrificial pawns. Only when they were surrounded and protected by the soldiers with battle shields did the two of them start panting. Under the heavy protection, although Evelyn and Doris did not speak, they both had the same thought. Roddy, who was in front, did not care what they thought. He was shouting at the magisters of the Lassiman Council, "Don't kill them! Control them! Let them know when to retreat!" If they really can't hold them off, then kill them. Understood. Okay. A few of the archmages responded, but most of them remained silent. They were older than Rhodey by a few decades and were not used to being commanded by a young man. However, they had no choice but to make such a choice because of the situation. Roddy was not interested in paying attention to these people. After all, in the face of a threat to their lives, these people had to listen to him even if they looked down on him. So, he turned to Merlin Sarah and said, "Let's begin, we don't have much time left." Merlin Sarah pointed her wand at the 70 to 80 magic crystal balls in front of them. After chanting a simple spell, these magic crystal balls instantly flew towards the subsidiary bodies that were pouncing on them. After she finished casting the spell, she moved closer to Roddy's ear and whispered, "Are you sure this method will work? You're not lying to me, right? If it didn't work, I wouldn't dare to charge myself." Roddy pretended to be relaxed as he replied. Although that was what he said, the strength of the ancient sea beasts that were constantly increasing did give people a feeling that they were getting more and more dangerous. He stroked the taut bowstring and added in the light of the magisters, "I have to use the fire arrow to go over. Cover me for a while." "Okay." Merlin Sarah did not waste any time. She turned around and started casting the spell. At the same time, the magisters' spells had already landed on the subsidiary bodies that were coming from all directions. Path of Frost, Entanglement of Vines, Net of Fire, and other spells instantly blocked the enemies that were charging at the front. Those that tried to rush into the front line were all blasted away by the cavalry's charged lance. Even so, many of the subsidiary bodies still ignored the magic crystal balls that landed beside them and squeezed forward with all their might. This situation quickly changed when a large-scale chain lightning was released. More than 10 of the paralyzed subsidiary bodies were immediately flipped over. After they stood up tremblingly, they all gave up on charging forward and began to fight for the magic crystal balls on the ground. After all, the purpose of the subsidiary body's existence was to collect energy. These balls were made from the high-grade magic crystal stored in Coromir. Although they were not large in size, each of them contained an astonishing amount of energy. In comparison, the result of the subsidiary bodies, rummaging through Duriel City for half an hour, couldn't even be compared to the magic crystal balls in front of them. Countless tentacles entangled and fought with each other. The winner swallowed the magic crystal ball on the spot and decisively turned around to leave. The craze quickly spread, and the subsidiary bodies lost interest in charging toward Doris. Instead, they quickly fought for the air expansion magic circle and the 10 balls. This scene further confirmed Roddy's conjecture about the parent body and subsidiary bodies. The magisters who were originally biased against them no longer said anything. They watched as the monsters ran toward the parent body, and then looked at Roddy. "Just attack within a kilometer. Don't worry about me." With a quiver and bone bow on his back, Roddy jumped onto the fire crossbow with the slate activation magic circle, made by Jeremy. After Merlin Sarah stood behind the driver's seat, he pushed the forward lever and rushed toward the street. The soldiers on the front line had already made way, and the resurrected fishmen, who were fighting on the periphery, also moved to the sides under Akasha's control. In the blink of an eye, Roddy's fire crossbow rushed straight through and led the way into the night. Roddy, who had the acute sense of the environment, didn't need any light to see the enemies on the street. However, he didn't need to dodge to the left or right because the conical shield that Merlin Sarah maintained in front of him with her magic wand was enough to repel the enemies that didn't have eyes. Even the corpses on the ground would be pushed aside. Seeing this, the magisters at the back didn't hesitate. They all cast fly and other similar skills and flew forward. After all, they definitely didn't want to fall behind a foreigner at this time. This charge was equivalent to almost 70% of Lasman's high-end combat power. Basically, all the battle-type magisters were mobilized, including a few members of the parliament who thought that they were not weak. In other words, Roddy's attack was tantamount to the final battle between Lasman and the primordial sea monster. The remaining soldiers and mages of Lasman looked at the powerful beings flying over their heads, and couldn't help but shout the slogan, "Long live Lasman." Because even ordinary people with low strength could feel the heroism of these figures. It was very likely that this attack would succeed or die. The dim and full of holes in the magic tower of Colomir was like a traveler in the darkness waiting for death. President Jeremy had already filled up the battle line with all the puppets he could control. At this moment, he could only look up at the darkness in the distance and grasp the wand in his hand. But no one noticed that when all the magisters rushed out, Lodica, who had previously left the top of the tower with the excuse that he had exhausted his magic power, silently followed the team and disappeared into the night. Crack, crack, the sound of wood cracking continued in the darkness. This was because half of the primordial sea monster's body had already stepped on land. The weight of its huge body supported by countless tentacles was astonishing. The wooden buildings on the dock were obviously unable to support it and were crushed on the spot. What followed was the entrance of the city wall that had originally blocked the merpeople from the bloody battle, followed by the taverns and shops. The people hiding in the houses were almost squashed into meat paste before they could even react. Even now, half of the primordial sea monster's body was still in the sea. Without the support of buoyancy, the energy required to move its huge body increased by several times, which caused it to stop after moving for a period of time. This was because it felt that if it continued to move forward, it wouldn't have enough energy. In the night, a low, stifling buzzing sound rang out. Even the people hiding in the houses covered their ears in pain because of this sound. In the dark city, the subsidiary bodies, that had been looking around for magic crystal suddenly stopped moving. Then, most of them turned around and began to return to the parent body. They were all collecting magic crystal and had not yet reached the full load level. At this time, they hurriedly returned to solve the urgent need of energy for the parent body. Amidst the noise of countless tentacles climbing over the walls, the people hiding in the houses were so scared that they held their breath. Among them, the three assassins who watched helplessly as the parent body approached and stopped in front of them all had cold sweat on their backs. They had originally planned to hide here, but now it seemed that if they did not leave quickly, they would end up like those houses that had been crushed. But if they got up and left, who could guarantee that they could successfully escape from the attack of the merpeople and the subsidiary bodies? Should we go? That thing stopped. Is it waiting for something? It can't be waiting for anything. It's waiting for us. We have to leave, or it'll be too late. Mage Breton growled. In the end, the three decided to take the risk and leave. But as soon as they jumped down from the roof, they saw the large number of subsidiary bodies returning like a tide. F***CK. Assassin Ethan cursed. The three realized that things were not looking good for them. But just as they were about to use all kinds of methods to kill their way out, they saw the subsidiary bodies passing in front of them as if they did not see them at all. The tentacles passed by just a few meters away from them, but they did not even pay attention to the three of them. Ethan, who was holding a dagger, gulped and whispered to the puppet master Sierra, who was leaning back against him, What's going on?" "I don't know," Sharda replied. When he saw more subsidiary bodies flying past him, he wanted to grab the horses and jump on them. However, he found that the three horses were extremely resistant to the sound of the behemoth in the distance. They were not willing to cooperate at all. "We can't ride them anymore. Let's go." In a moment of desperation, Mage Breton immediately made a decision. He cast a lighten body spell on himself and his two companions, and the three immediately headed towards the north of the city. At first, they were frightened by the monsters that kept coming, but when more than a dozen children ignored them, they calmed down a lot and moved faster and faster. In the night, the three of them were not afraid of the merpeople that had scattered. Spells and daggers easily took care of the blue-gilled merpeople that tried to get close. But before they could run far, they suddenly saw a red light slowly appearing in the sky. Looking back, the giant beast that had stopped moving had strange archetypal patterns on its body. As a mage, Breton could tell at a glance that the patterns seemed to be in harmony with the rhythm of some kind of spell. And before he could identify it clearly, a series of spheres with a diameter of more than a meter shot out from the center of the patterns, bam bam bam. The flickering light of the shield reflected in Breton's eyes. Only then did he realize that there were many figures with powerful magic floating in the sky in front of him. And these small meatballs, that were flying extremely fast, were obviously the giant beast's means of attack. Let's go. The mages of Lassiman are all here. Chapter 7:16. Bam bam bam. A series of meatballs smashed into the middle of the road in front of Roddy. The shockwave from the explosion even shattered the wooden door of a nearby tavern into pieces. 3 shallow pits with a diameter of more than 1 meter appeared on the ground. The advancing firebolt wasn't an all-terrain vehicle, so Roddy could only quickly brake and change directions to dodge the attack. The flaw of the chassis was immediately revealed. The right wheel of the firebolt was lifted off the ground due to the shift in center of gravity, and Merlin Sarah was almost thrown off the car. "Watch out!" Roddy yelled hurriedly. He quickly swung his left hand in the direction of the steering wheel and leaned forward. He reached out with his right hand and grabbed Merlin Sarah, who was leaning to the side, to help her stabilize her balance. Damn it! This guy is getting stronger and stronger. This string of attacks was obviously a warning from the ancient behemoth to the attacking mages. In the sky above, almost all of the attacking mages suffered similar attacks. "I can handle it," Merlinsera's voice came from above, but it was much softer than usual. Only then did Roddy realize that he was holding her left leg tightly. The tight and elastic feeling made him cough dryly, and he wanted to let go as if he had been electrocuted, but at this moment, another string of attacks smashed into the buildings on the side of the road. With a loud crack, the collapsed wood and stones blocked half of the road, forcing him to brake again and change directions. Merlin Sarah was already unstable, and she fell forward. Roddy reacted quickly and reached out to pull Merlin Sarah, who had fallen out of the car, onto his lap. "Are you all right?" Amidst the howling wind, Roddy had no time to look down and could only ask loudly as he drove. Merlin Sarah could feel his arm around her tightly, as if he was afraid that she would fall. She couldn't help but smirk. Then, she grabbed onto Roddy's neck and sat up. "I can feel that guy's eyes on me. If we continue like this, we will definitely be attacked again. I'll go to the sky to attract the firepower, you keep going." "Alright." The two of them tacitly didn't mention what had just happened. After Merlinsera finished speaking, she leaped into the air and used the levitation spell to send her flying to the side. At the same time, the third flying beast streaked across the sky. Roddy continued to drive for a few hundred meters. As expected, there were no further attacks. He raised his head and saw that the sky was filled with streaks of different colors. Among them were the projectile skills of the magisters, and there were also the blood of the behemoth. Amidst the mana mist, no one noticed his whereabouts. Looking straight ahead, the giant beast with ripples on its body was already right in front of him. Roddy opened the map bar and confirmed that he was about 800 meters away from the gigantic beast. This was an area where he could activate the spell formation at any time. Roddy immediately stopped shooting and scanned his surroundings. Perhaps it was because he was too close to the Matrix, but he found that there were no merfolk on the street other than some messy debris on the ground. So, He carried the activation spell formation, made by Jeremy, and ran to the eaves of a nearby building. While avoiding the sight of the matrix, he used the climb skill to climb up the tallest building on the street. When his field of vision was wide open, he activated the Demon Hunter Vision skill and observed his surroundings. In the blink of an eye, the dark world lit up with a myriad of colors. The surrounding houses were all in cool colors, but some of the buildings with magic crystal spell formations had a more distinct silhouette. Looking into the distance, the silhouette of the matrix was like that of a giant tree with lush branches and leaves. However, its hemispherical upper body looked a little fat, because Roddy could see that only the middle part of its body had an orange glow like that of a furnace. This meant that the energy of the matrix was actually more concentrated in the center of its body. In the city area of Duriel, the subsidiary bodies that were shuttling back and forth were also glowing in different colors. Roddy almost instantly caught sight of the brightest group among them. The subsidiary bodies that had consumed the magic crystal ball and air expansion spell formation were extremely dazzling because of the high energy they carried. At this moment, they were only 300 meters away from the matrix. The great magician in the sky was also a dazzling individual. Roddy took a glance and confirmed that Merlin Sarah was casting spells at the matrix in the air more than 300 meters away from him. Just as he had predicted, within a distance of 1 kilometer, the threat of the ancient behemoth to the individual mages was very limited. No matter how many spells it shot out, the nimble mages in the air could easily dodge them. Of course, these great magicians could not pose much of a threat to the behemoth either. This was because the effective range of most spells could not reach more than 1 kilometer. The spells that streaked across the air were all in long parabolas. When they reached the surface of the behemoth's body, they were neither fast nor powerful. The behemoth didn't even need to use its tentacles to block the spells. Just its evolved protective shell alone could easily withstand the damage of these spells. After a brief observation, Roddy was about to find a place to hide. However, just as he turned his head, a faint purple glow suddenly appeared on the floor in his Witcher's vision. No. Roddy's hair immediately stood on end. He immediately realized that this was not a normal phenomenon. Without hesitation, he used the leap skill and leaped from the height of a 3-story building to the side. Crack! The wooden floor that Roddy had just left heard a shattering sound. The place where Roddy had been standing suddenly had a large number of purple crystals in the shape of daggers. If Roddy had not dodged in time, he would have been stabbed into a sieve. What the hell? As soon as his feet touched the ground, Roddy quickly rushed into the shadows of the nearby buildings. He immediately understood that someone was plotting against him. If it wasn't for the Witcher's vision that allowed him to see the premonition of a spell, he would have met with misfortune. Roddy narrowed his eyes. Although his expression was indifferent, the anger in his eyes was not concealed. Why was it that no matter where he went, he would run into people who would stab him in the back? He was still holding the stone tablet in his hand. Seeing this, he immediately stuffed it into the gap between his quiver and his back. He reached for the bone bow and activated the Witcher's vision skill to look around, searching for a target. However, just as he swept his gaze across the empty street, he discovered 3 people running in his direction from afar. However, these 3 people were quite a distance away. They looked like fleeing fellows and couldn't be the ones who had just ambushed him. Thus, Roddy directly excluded them and turned his head to look at the sky. The person who could silently cast this spell might be among this group of great magicians. Lodica gripped his staff tightly and quietly hid behind a building not far from Roddy. His slightly furrowed brows showed that he was puzzled that his attack had missed. As a core member of the Balliner Academy, although he wasn't a professional combat mage, he was a powerful great magician who had won several actual combat tournaments. To sneak up on an ordinary person in such a chaotic night, yet the other party dodged in advance. To be honest, Lodica was very surprised. This was because he wasn't an ordinary elemental magician, but a very unpopular crystal magician, who used invisible elements to transform into tangible crystals for attack and defense. The greatest advantage of a crystal magician was that the fluctuations before the spell took shape were extremely small and difficult to detect. After the spell took shape, it came with more physical damage, which ordinary elemental resistance shields couldn't withstand. Clutching the staff in his hand, Lodica took a deep breath. He knew that he had no way out now. Next, he had to kill Roddy in the shortest time possible to solve the threat of the Kingdom of Karen to the Balliner Academy once and for all. Only with Roddy dead could he secure his position. And this chaotic scene was his only chance. Although he had hired a team of assassins to prepare for the operation, Lodica knew very well that if Roddy succeeded in killing this ancient behemoth that threatened the entire Duriel city, he would become a hero in the eyes of the people of Raximan. When that time came, the only thing he could do was to revoke the assassination order, because if something happened to the hero, the council would investigate thoroughly and blame it on him. As a politician, he didn't believe that a foreigner like Roddy would risk his life to solve the problem for Raximan. In his opinion, Roddy's move was simply to take all the credit, in order to gain an advantage in future negotiations with Raximan. So long before the magic crystal ball was thrown out, he had secretly implanted a crystal mark that only he could detect. This way, after killing Roddy, he would be able to grasp the timing to activate the magic circle, and the cause of Roddy's death could be completely blamed on the fleeing monsters. With this thought in mind, he quietly moved his body and looked at the place where Roddy was hiding. He raised the tip of his staff slightly and silently chanted a spell. Lodica knew that his opponent was in a state of extreme vigilance at the moment, so he lengthened the spell-casting process by twice as much as usual, just to try his best to completely conceal the magical fluctuations. But he would never have thought that Roddy had the Witcher's vision, skill, and could clearly see the traces of elements slowly gathering in the air. Lodica deliberately lengthened the spell-casting process, just so that Roddy could follow the traces and quickly lock onto his position. Just as the spell-casting reached the final stage, Roddy had already raised his longbow and aimed at the building where Lodica was hiding without hesitation. He activated Cannon Blast and shot out 8 arrows in a row. Lodica kept his eyes on Roddy while he was casting the spell. When the arrows came directly at the opposite door, he immediately suffered a backlash because of the wrong recitation of the spell. Apart from the pain of the magic power running amok in his body, the roar of the arrows exploding on the passively triggered crystal shield made his ears ring on the spot. Boom, boom, boom. Chapter 717. But even so, Lodica was still lying on the ground because he stepped on a piece of broken wood in his haste to retreat. Coincidentally, if he had not fallen at the right time, the 7th and 8th arrows would have pierced through his skull and killed him on the spot. A great magister had been knocked to the ground by a sneak attack and had almost lost his life. Lodica found this fact hard to accept for a moment, but when he looked at the stone house he had just hidden in, the surreal feeling made him shiver all over. This was because the impact of Roddy's arcane explosion arrow had half of the house collapsed. Who the hell was this guy? How could an arrow be more powerful than a mage's? Lodica was frightened and hurriedly replenished his crystal shield. After that, he gritted his teeth and hid behind the other side of the house. Just as he was about to cast another spell, he suddenly realized that Roddy was not attacking him. What's going on? With the reflection of the crystal shield, Lodica's eyes widened. He saw the 3 people who had just run over from the street suddenly attack Roddy. The flash of blue light from the dagger, the fluttering frost arrow, and the agile construct puppet. Lodica immediately realized that the 3 people in front of him were coincidentally the assassins he had hired. God is on my side. Suppressing his panic, Lodica stretched out his hand and threw out a scroll. At the same time, he quickly released the solid stagnation skill. On the other side, the three assassins attacked in a hurry. By the time they recognized Roddy, they were already within 30 meters of him. But for them, there was no need to miss this sudden surprise. Their assassination target, Roddy, had no other people around to protect him, and they did not see the goddess of death. They suddenly bumped into him. If they did not act now, when would they act? They saw Roddy's excellent leather armor and the strangely shaped bow in his hand. Naturally, they had a better idea of Roddy's strength. Because of this, the assassins used all their skills to ensure that they could get rid of Roddy as soon as possible. When they collectively decided to attack from 30 meters away, Roddy just happened to activate bombardment. By the time the 8 arrows had been shot and half of the house had been blown up, blade and spell were already in front of him. Roddy had always been vigilant of his surroundings, but he still didn't expect that the three of them would attack him without saying a word. Surprised, he could only activate the advanced prism shield on his belt to block the attack. Caw-caw. The sound of impact rang out instantly. The streamlined leopard-like puppet crashed into the shield, its sharp claws causing the shield to shake violently. Ethan's dagger sliced through the air. Blue light mixed with dark energy shattered the advanced prism shield on the spot. This clearly showed that the opponent had the strength of a level 20 or above, and that the damage he could deal in a short period of time was extremely strong. However, his second attack didn't even touch the corner of Roddy's clothes. Using Shadow Waltz, Roddy instantly created 3 afterimages and quickly escaped the enemy's encirclement. Gotcha! Breton's frost arrow hit one of the afterimages. The 3 of them were stunned at the same time. Under the dim light, the afterimage spell couldn't distinguish the real from the fake. Using this half a second of hesitation, Roddy's counterattack began. Summoning Stone, Water Elemental was thrown out. Before the surging elemental aura could condense, Roddy's energy arrow had already locked onto Breton, who was condensing his second spell. Whoosh! The water elemental, Frost Nova, bloomed immediately, freezing the puppet and the assassin Ethan, who were trying to catch up on the spot. At the same time, a series of arrows smashed into Breton's shield, causing a series of cracking sounds to ring out. Breton, who was frightened by the rapid attacks, immediately used the Ice Barrier skill. Roddy knew that this skill, commonly known as Ice Coffin, could make him immune to all damage for a short period of time, so he immediately changed his target and aimed the guided arrow at the puppet master Shalda, who was hiding in the corner of the street. However, just as he shot the arrow, the assassin Ethan, who had used the Escape skill, had once again rushed in front of him, his dagger aimed at Roddy's chest. The water elemental tried to transform and block the attack, but he easily dodged it. Seeing that the attack was about to succeed, Roddy's Dragon Power Roar had already been unleashed. The violent roar and the aura of dragons instantly filled the noisy battlefield. Marinsula, who was dodging the arrows not far away, immediately turned around, and with an angry roar, she flew over in a frenzy. And before the assassin Ethan, who was stunned by the Dragon Power skill, could recover, he saw Roddy swing the longbow in his hand like a scimitar. Pfft! The bow arm smashed into his face, and the force was so great that Ethan's eyeballs popped out on the spot. Then, with a horizontal kick, Roddy smashed his sternum with a crack sound. Fully activated, Roddy's strength was not inferior to that of any holy knight of the same level. The assassin did not even have time to struggle before his heart stopped and he died. But before he could change his target and continue shooting, the puppet leopard, which had broken free from its shackles, and a series of frost arrows followed closely behind. Roddy wanted to move, but crystal chains instantly appeared under his feet and bound his legs on the spot. Rodika's control spell was completed at the crucial moment. He knew that he could not preserve his strength now, so he stopped hiding and immediately chanted a spell loudly. 3 against 1, no matter how he looked at it, Roddy had no chance of winning. But to everyone's surprise, after being bound, Roddy did not make any evasive movements. He waved his empty hand forward, and the wrist guard's arcane impact knocked the puppet 5 meters back. Then, he activated Arcane Shield to block the frost arrow. With a crack, the enhanced frost arrow directly shattered the shield and then hit Roddy's shoulder. But he did not move. He forcefully offset the remaining damage with his powerful elemental resistance. Then, he raised his bone bow and consecutively shot Silence Arrow and Arcane Shot in 2 directions. Rodica did not expect Roddy to be able to calmly fight back under such circumstances. As a result, the Silence Arrow interrupted his spell, and the second magic backlash caused him to involuntarily bend over. At the same time, the Arcane Shot hit the core of the puppeteer Charda's steel armor puppet, and it shattered on the spot. It could not be said that his armor was weak, but Roddy's attack was too sharp. After the first blow, the second and third arrows easily pierced through his chest. Under the tremendous force, his body was pushed back, and his whole body was nailed to the wall by the 2 arrows. But he did not die immediately. Still holding the small control spell formation in his hand, he pressed a button in it. The puppet leopard that had been repelled immediately shone brightly, and its speed and strength instantly doubled. Amidst the sound of parts breaking, it once again charged at Roddy. This was obviously a manifestation of the power of the magic crystal being pushed to the extreme. When the puppet leopard jumped, its front legs even bent strangely because of the excessive force. Roddy had just raised his arm in time when the puppet collided with him. Bang! To Charda's surprise, such an all-out attack did not shake Roddy at all. He held the bone bow in his left hand and directly stabbed the leopard's neck, stopping it on the spot as if it had hit a wall. But Roddy could not block the puppet leopard's outstretched claws. The iron claws continued to stretch forward, and one of them stabbed Roddy's chest, but was blocked by the dragon's scale armor. The other clawed at his shoulder, and on the spot, the bag of the quiver was cut in half. Crack! The quiver fell to the ground, and the control spell formation that was originally stuffed on his back also fell to the ground. Roddy's eyes narrowed, and his right hand directly stabbed into the puppet leopard's abdomen. He grabbed the structure of its spine and activated the second arcane blast. With a loud bang, the puppet leopard was blasted into flying fragments, but Roddy was not unscathed. Blood spilled down his arm and onto the ground. The pain of his hands being cut by metal made Roddy frown. But at the moment, what he was most worried about was the control spell formation that had fallen to the ground. Lodica's crystal chain made it impossible for him to move. In a moment of desperation, Roddy could only attack as a form of defense. His fingers quickly pulled the bowstring and began bombarding the 2 people 30 to 40 meters away. But the puppet leopard's attack ultimately delayed his counterattack. In the few seconds between the attack and the attack, the mage Breton successfully cast the icicle storm stored in his staff. In an instant, hundreds of icicles fell from the sky and surrounded them from all directions. It took less than 2 seconds from the formation of the spell to the completion of the casting. In this short interval, Roddy's arrow had once again shattered the opponent's shield and blasted him away. This was a case of meeting on a narrow path. The braver one wins. Roddy ignored the life-threatening spell and continued attacking because he knew that this battle could not become a tug-of-war. Otherwise, he would definitely lose in the end. After his powerful attack succeeded, he quickly activated the ice barrier in his ring to block the icicles. Jingle clang! 2 seconds later, Roddy cancelled the spell and raised his hand to face the final enemy. But just as he aimed at Lodica, a red light fell from the sky and directly appeared behind him. Boom! The house that Lodica was hiding in was smashed into pieces on the spot, and the shield around his body was broken on the spot. Lodica staggered a few steps to steady himself, but before he could turn around, The figure that appeared out of the fire grabbed him by the neck and smashed him face down on the ground like a sack. Bang! 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 Merlinsera's seemingly delicate body suddenly erupted with power even more terrifying than Erwin's. Her red eyes stared at Lodica's deformed face through the smoke, and with a kick of her left leg she twisted her waist and swung her arm, sending Lodica flying. With a loud bang, Lodica's body smashed into a stone wall, and his whole body was embedded in the crater created by the impact. Although he still had the crystal barrier passive spell on him, such a violent physical attack had exceeded the capacity of the shield. Lodica's consciousness was already blurred, and he couldn't even tell who was attacking him. This was because his entire face was completely deformed, and the bridge of his nose, his brow, and his teeth were broken in many places. His spine was also dislocated due to the impact, and he basically couldn't feel his entire body. Rings of light floated around Merlinsera's body due to the violent elemental tremors. She recognized who the other party was, but she didn't stop casting her spell. With a wave of her hand, she completed the final strike. The elemental wheel saw flew out, slicing Lodica, Charda, and the entire wall into pieces. Roddy! Merlinsera didn't even look at the bloody pieces of flesh on the ground. She turned around and rushed toward Roddy, who had just broken free from the elemental chain. After seeing that he was fine, she let out a deep breath and asked, "What happened?" "I was targeted for no reason, and then the other 3 people suddenly attacked me." Roddy couldn't determine the identity of the 3 people. The only thing he cared about now was the control circle that had just landed at his feet. But to his dismay, the control circle had already been smashed into pieces by the ice cones. Damn it! He threw the ice cones on his hand to the ground, and the blood on his hand dyed the fragments of the circle red. Seeing this, Merlinsera's pupils shrank. "Let's go." Without another word, she reached out and grabbed Roddy. "Let's go. Those bastards from Lassieman are asking for it. Let's go. They can kill as many people as they want." The destruction of the circle meant that Roddy could no longer activate it. When Merlinsera saw the wounds on Roddy's body, she was so angry that she wanted to blow up the entire Colomere magic tower. After all, she wasn't human. If this city was destroyed, then so be it. Humans could kill as many people as they wanted. However, Roddy grabbed the agitated Merlinsera, and the 2 of them stood face to face. When their eyes met, Merlinsera found that although his brows were tightly furrowed, his gaze was unusually calm. "It's meaningless for us to leave. If leaving could solve the problem, I wouldn't be here." Merlinsera's tense muscles relaxed. She knew that from Roddy's words, he must have made up his mind. "Then what should we do? Should I go back and ask Jeremy to make another one?" "It's too late to do that now." Roddy turned to look at the giant beast that was continuously absorbing the subsidiary bodies. Those guys with the magic crystal balls must have entered the parent body. If he was right, he had to activate the circle within 5 minutes. Otherwise, everything would be in vain. So, before she could finish, a series of ice cones were thrown at Merlinsera. The 2 of them quickly dodged to the side. In the midst of the explosion, Roddy took off the ring given to him by Kardashian and took out the Ring of Pardon from his pocket. Then, he yelled in the noisy battlefield, "I'll go activate it." Chapter 7:18. "Trust me. It's not as dangerous as you think," Roddy said as he picked up the quiver on the ground and jumped back onto the firebolt. He turned his head and said, "My Ring of Pardon can prevent damage. Even if I can't activate it, I have a way to escape." With that said, he activated a skill in his skill bar that he had never used before: Demon Affinity. As soon as he used the skill, his body was quickly shrouded by a layer of faint black smoke. Merlinsera instantly sensed that his aura was very similar to that of the subsidiary bodies. She immediately knew that he wasn't lying. Another series of subsidiary bodies came crashing down. Merlin Sarah was afraid that the firepower would affect Roddy, so she hurriedly cast a levitation spell. As she turned around and leaped up, she yelled, "I'll find you regardless of whether I succeed or not." However, she didn't get a response because Roddy had already activated the firebolt and quickly disappeared into the street. Merlin Sarah bit her lip as she watched his disappearing figure. She turned around and flew into the sky. However, just as she rose back into the air, she suddenly realized that the atmosphere around her had become a little strange. The number of magisters who were fighting side by side suddenly decreased. She turned around and saw a series of subsidiary bodies hit a magister's shield and sent him crashing to the ground. What's wrong? It was very easy for these subsidiary bodies to dodge from a distance of 1 kilometer. How could they still hit a powerful magister? Just as this thought popped up in her mind, a sharp whistle sounded in front of her. Merlin Sarah focused her eyes and saw the subsidiary bodies flying towards her as fast as lightning. They almost reached her in the blink of an eye. She clenched her teeth and dodged to the side with all her might. Only then did she manage to dodge the 3 shadows. Only then did she realize that the subsidiary bodies were no longer spherical. Instead, they had become long spiral-shaped rods. Not only that, they could adjust their flight trajectory by themselves instead of relying on the giant beast to aim. They looked like a very small subsidiary body. When they flew in the air, they could control their flight direction and were almost like arrows with the ability to guide. Merlin Sarah finally understood why many mages chose to land on the ground to hide themselves. It was because their advantage in the air was decreasing. If this beast moved any faster, they wouldn't be able to dodge it even if they wanted to. However, she did not plan to hide, because at this moment, Roddy was rapidly advancing towards the giant beast's main body. If the other party discovered him, then the danger that Roddy faced would skyrocket. With this thought in mind, Merlin Sarah conjured another spell and attacked the gigantic beast continuously while moving rapidly. There were fewer and fewer magisters in the sky, and the primordial beasts soon locked on to this conspicuous figure. Fortunately, Merlin Sarah was familiar with aerial battles as a member of the dragon race. Otherwise, she would have long been shot down by the beasts. At this time, the magisters, who had exhausted their mana, finally realized a serious problem. The behemoth in front of them had evolved again. The light on the surface of its body continued to flicker, and the tentacles that were originally supporting the bottom of its body seemed to continue to extend in a short period of time. Amidst the muffled rumbling sounds, the huge body began to move forward again. 7 or 8 tentacles suddenly rose up, and the floating space tower, which was still some distance away from it, was entangled on the spot. Then, the tentacles not only pulled the tower away from its predetermined floating trajectory, but also flipped it over and threw it directly in the direction of the Corin Mill magic tower. After the floating tower left its trajectory, it lost its original ability to float. All the magisters watched helplessly as it fell 700 meters in front of the tower, crushing a large piece of the building. At this point, they finally understood how terrifying this giant beast was. It had only been about an hour since it landed, but it was already so powerful that all the magisters combined couldn't do anything to it. If they allowed it to occupy this city and absorb all the magic essence of Duriel, what would the result be? Apart from despair, they couldn't feel any other emotions at this moment. Only Merlin Sarah gritted her teeth and continued to move in the air. However, due to the rapid depletion of mana, she had no choice but to land on the ground and quickly retreat. Just as the magisters in the sky stopped casting spells to attack the ancient sea beast, the beast that had completely landed on the ground changed again. Its gigantic body began to tremble violently, and the holes on its body slowly opened up. It actually released countless children. These children were different from the ones that had been ejected previously. They were not large in size, and were about half a meter tall like an octopus. One by one, they crawled out of the body of the mother, and began to surge in all directions like a tide. They no longer searched around for magic crystal or other objects like the large children. Instead, they pounced on the murlocs and human corpses on the streets and began to munch on them. As for those that had no corpses to eat, they crawled through the windows of various buildings and pounced on the food ingredients in the various shops, the various plants on the streets, and the civilians that had fallen to the ground and could not escape in time. The number of these small children was astonishing. At first glance, they looked like worker ants surging out of an ant's nest. Their own strength might even be able to deal with ordinary people, but when 10 or 20 of them surrounded them, fear inevitably began to spread throughout the city. This guy wants to turn this place into hell. The magisters came to their senses, but now they could only stare at the scene in front of them in a daze. In the face of an absolute number of enemies, they could either completely burn down Duriel or watch the city fall into the hands of this terrifying monster. When they realized this fact, the only thing the entire council could count on was the plan that Roddy was carrying out. But these magisters were busy dodging the monsters in the sky and did not notice the fact that Lodica and the 3 assassins were besieging Roddy. Only a few people who were closer heard Roddy's dragon power roar, but they did not know what was going on, and Roddy was not interested in paying attention to them now because he, who had activated demon affinity, had already jumped off the fire arrow. While dodging the small children sweeping across the streets, he accelerated towards the huge figure that shone with light. The effect of demon affinity was to greatly reduce the hostility and vigilance of demons towards you and allow you to have a demonic aura for the duration of the skill. When he first obtained this skill, Roddy felt that it was of little value, but he did not expect it to come in handy so quickly. Thanks to the skill, the moving children around him completely ignored him. Occasionally, a few tried to approach him, but they were attracted by his weapons and equipment and did not show any hostility towards Roddy. After crossing the last street, Roddy finally came under the body of the ancient behemoth. He activated Demon Hunter Vision, which had come off cooldown, and raised his head. At this moment, Roddy could clearly see the behemoth's body constantly moving forward, layers of tentacles stretching out like a forest, and the squashed buildings were constantly groaning. The small children crawled past his legs, and the sticky feeling made him feel very uncomfortable. Roddy looked left and right. The light of Demon Hunter Vision made it easy for him to determine his destination, so he followed a returning child next to him. He sprinted all the way, and with the help of the climb skill, he easily climbed up the waving tentacles of the meat wall and followed the child in front of him into the hole leading to the energy digestion core. With the help of Demon Hunter Vision, Roddy moved quickly and did not take any detours. But with a bow and arrow on his back, it was difficult for him to accept the sticky feeling and the strong stench of blood all around him. After entering the pink flesh hole, he almost had a hard time breathing. Apparently, this thing was only suitable for invertebrates to pass through. Roddy had no choice but to grit his teeth and hold his breath, resisting the sticky liquid that covered his entire body. After sliding for more than 10 seconds, he finally reached his final destination, Energy Digestion Hole. The reason why Roddy could rush all the way from the outside without taking any detours was that a group of mages had personally rushed into the body and found a way to kill it. And after the behemoth's death, information about the body structure of the mother was passed to Roddy along with demon mastery. If he did not understand the behemoth, of course, Roddy would not have dared to take the risk. But the theory that the predecessors came up with their lives finally came in handy here. With a glance, Roddy saw more than 40 magic crystal balls that had just been spat out, as well as the air expansion circle that was lying in the middle of a pile of magic crystal that was flashing with a faint white light. So far, the effect of demon affinity hadn't attracted any attention from the mother. The children around him, who had scooped the magic crystal ball into the pit, didn't care about him at all. Clearly, they regarded him as one of them. Roddy glanced at the status bar, and confirmed that there were still 4 minutes left for the disguise buff. So he directly jumped down and stood in the middle of the digesting items. He reached out to pick up the circle and cast Mage's Hand continuously, picking up the magic crystal balls that had fallen around him in the air to prevent them from falling down and being digested in advance. 45, 47, 52. That's enough. To maximize the effect of the circle, Roddy had to make sure that there were more than 50 magic crystal balls around him. Although the number of these 50 or 20 magic crystal balls was not as many as the piles of items that the behemoth had already digested, in terms of total energy, these magic crystal balls were far purer and more powerful than the previous miscellaneous items. After the air expansion circle was activated, it would cause the resonance of the surrounding magic crystal. If the energy exceeded a certain limit, it would cause a chain reaction, leading to a violent elemental storm and accelerated expansion. Back then, the High Elves had paid the price of a Grand Arcanist and 3 high-level Arcanists to sum up this experience. Therefore, Roddy was very clear that the circle in his hand was the switch to trigger this storm, and it must be activated at this time and place. If any of the conditions were missing, everything would be in vain. Everything was ready. Roddy swung his arm that was covered in mucus. Just as he was about to activate the circle, he suddenly heard a sigh. This is useless. The clear high elf language made Roddy's hair stand on end. His hand trembled, and he almost threw the circle away. There could not be any living person in this place. Where did this fluent high elf language come from? The area was not completely dark because of the flashing light around them. Roddy looked around but did not see anything out of the ordinary. However, he once again heard a whisper that seemed to be right next to his ear. "Human, don't waste your energy." He suddenly looked up and finally found the source of the voice. At the top of the energy digestion zone, there was a white crystal floating in the middle of the wriggling flesh. The voice clearly had something to do with it. Holding the circle in his hand, Roddy narrowed his eyes at the milky white crystal. He activated Leap and used the climb skill to quickly climb to the top of the flesh 7 or 8 feet away. He raised his hand and grabbed the crystal. The moment his hand touched the crystal, Roddy felt a warm current spread through his body. He could feel the powerful soul power contained in the crystal. In a sense, this was similar to the vessel that Augustine had left on the Beastmen. However, this crystal was obviously of better quality, and the power it contained was more complete and powerful. "Who are you?" Roddy asked. At the same time, the crystal in his hand quickly formed a blurry image in his mind. It seemed that because there was a limit to the energy it could use, the soul residing in the crystal seemed to be in a mess when expressing its intentions. In that instant, Roddy saw countless scenes in his mind: a burning sea of fire, a chaotic city, a twisted high elf face, flying tentacles, and a beam of light so bright that he could not look at it directly. He frowned and tried to understand what the soul was trying to say, but the scenes quickly disappeared. Then, Roddy saw a pair of lake blue eyes. It was a strange feeling. There was clearly a flashing flesh in front of him, but at the same time, he could meet the pair of eyes in his mind. At the same time, he found that he could not see the face or body of the person. He could only feel the calm and somewhat lazy gaze. Edith, Grand Arcanist Edith. The sudden response made Roddy's mouth fall open. Not only had he heard this name before, but he was also very sure of the person's identity. Edith was the Grand Arcanist who had sacrificed herself to fight against the Mother. Chapter 719. A thought came to Roddy's mind, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Obviously, the mother that Edith killed by self-destructing did not really die, but survived through some kind of lucky method. And the mother that he was dealing with now was probably the same one that was killed more than 700 years ago. Thinking of the words, "It's useless," Roddy immediately realized a problem. Could it be that the other person was saying that the method he was using now was useless? Could it be that half a day's effort was in vain? It is too powerful, too ancient, perhaps it was born at the same time as this world, and it is impossible to kill. The calm words continued to echo in his ears, as if answering the question in Roddy's heart. Seeing that the other person responded, Roddy frowned even deeper and immediately asked, "Have you found any way over these years? Now may be the only chance." "Way? I don't know, I only know that I failed at the beginning, human. But I can tell you that its core is not here, perhaps it is higher." "Higher? How do you know if you don't try?" Roddy did not seem to doubt the other person's words. He raised his hand and controlled the magic crystal balls to climb up with him. But when he reached the top, he reached out his hand and touched the asterisk at the top and suddenly said, "Edith, if I say I have a way to resurrect you, are you willing to help me?" Time seemed to stand still at this moment. Roddy, who had activated the Witcher's vision, immediately felt that the fiery flowing elements around him almost completely solidified at this moment. In the next second, the originally silent crystal began to flash violently, and then the whole flesh wall shook violently, as if it was going to shake Roddy out of the asterisk. However, he leaped down as if he had expected it. Standing on top of a small mountain of magic crystals, he lowered his head and looked at the soul crystal in his hand. In his devil hunter vision, the purple spiderweb-like traces on the surface of the crystal were very conspicuous. "Do you think I haven't seen the trick of reincarnation?" Roddy snorted and immediately activated the air expansion circle. From the moment he saw this crystal, he felt that something was wrong. Although the soul energy within was abundant, it was chaotic and disorderly. The faint purple light lingering around it indicated that this thing had probably been eroded long ago. The projection of Solomon on the glacial plain had given him a deep enough lesson. Now that he saw a similar scene, how could he not be careful? Moreover, how could a normal high elf, who stood at the top of the mages, use the word God to describe a sea creature? According to the records of demon control, this arcanist blew up his opponent's body and rushed to the core of the High Elf's body. He then self-destructed and died together with the High Elves. His heroic deed was sung by the High Elves for generations. If a mage were to address an enemy respectfully, the only possibility was that their consciousness had been unknowingly eroded and influenced. Fortunately, Edith was not occupied by Baranchalu like Solomon's projection. At the same time, she was not connected to the mother body. Otherwise, the moment the opponent discovered him, the mother body would have taken action to kill Roddy directly instead of trying to mislead him like this. In order to verify his judgment, Roddy had been trying to figure out how to deal with the mother from the beginning to the end. When he saw that the other party did not answer his question directly and tried to use a verbal trap to lure him away, he immediately felt a trace of fear behind the other party's calm words. So he tried to throw the bomb of resurrection. Unsurprisingly, it caused the trapped survival instinct to react violently. At this point, Roddy had perfectly avoided the trap that the enemy had dug for him. At the same time, he was even more certain of his choice. The moment the circle was activated, the airflow that blew out made him stagger. However, Roddy did not leave immediately. Instead, he controlled the magician's hand to gather all the magic crystal balls that he could catch beside him. Then, he used the energy arrows in his quiver to nail them to the flesh wall beside him. Pfft! The arrows pierced into the flesh wall, causing the whole chamber to shake violently. The mother body sensed the unusual movement in its body. It tried to shrink the chamber in fear, but it could not stop the rapidly expanding air. This was like throwing a Mentos into the stomach of a person who had drunk a large barrel of Coke. The suddenly expanding air made the air in Roddy's field of vision expand rapidly. The drastic change in air pressure made his eardrums suck. The mother body realized that it would not be able to accommodate so much air if it continued like this. It immediately opened the hole that the child body had entered, trying to quickly expel the air. This was the moment that Roddy had been waiting for. He jumped to the side, got into one of the holes, and was quickly pushed out by the air flow. At this time, it was too late for the ancient sea beast to stop him, because the expanding air flow had quickly entered the maximum power state because of the amazing energy of the charged crystal. As soon as Roddy got into the hole, he flew more than 30 meters like a fired cannonball and fell among the layers of tentacles. Because the force of the ejection was too great, when Roddy flew out, his legs directly inserted into the roof of a collapsed building below. It took him a long time to climb out. It was not a safe place under the giant beast, so Roddy quickly got out and ran out. However, the dense tentacles were like a jungle that was difficult to cross. Roddy did not dare to use the explosive arrow to blast a way out, because once the other party found him, the result would be Mount Tai on top. In the next second, the hissing sound resounded through the sky above his head. Roddy knew very well that this was a sign that the circle was approaching the critical point. So the only thing he could do now was to grit his teeth and rush out. The air expansion circle itself was nothing special, but after using too much charged crystal, it would cause the expansion effect to increase uncontrollably and form an unstable elemental vortex. This vortex was like a vacuum. It would actively absorb all the energy around it to enhance the effect of the circle itself. In the laboratory, this kind of situation would never happen. Even if it did, it would be stopped quickly because of the energy isolation. But in the core chamber of the matrix, the magic crystal ball that Roddy had nailed around the circle was rapidly dissipating energy in the unstable elemental vortex. The effect of the air expansion circle suddenly increased exponentially, and the originally small chamber was like an inflated balloon that was tens of times, hundreds of times bigger. The archmages standing a kilometer away from the gigantic beast raised their heads to look at the black shadow in the night sky. The flickering light revealed the unstable state of the gigantic beast. Very quickly, its mountain-like body began to expand rapidly. Its silhouette covered the night sky and the moonlight, as if it wanted to completely block out the stars in the sky. It will explode. Run. Although they had such expectations, looking at the giant beast that was already more than 300 meters tall, none of them thought that 1 kilometer could be considered a safe distance. The strongest magisters gave the alarm and quickly retreated in the direction of the Colomere magic tower. They hadn't run far when they saw a figure flying in the opposite direction, directly flying into the sky, heading in the direction of the mother. It was Merlin Sarah, who was desperately looking for Roddy with her eyes wide open. In front of the Colomere magic tower, the Matrix's silhouette suddenly enlarged by 3 to 4 times, which also frightened the defending troops. Akasha and Sylvia immediately ordered the frontline soldiers to retreat. Hide behind the magic tower, quick! With the resurrected fishmen blocking the way, the troops did not suffer any casualties when they retreated. Akasha grabbed Naifi and, under the protection of David and the others, went around to the back of the magic tower. Just then, the giant beast behind them exploded with a loud noise. Boom! Its hemispherical body expanded to almost a complete sphere, with the highest point being 350 meters tall. When the orange light under its skin reached its peak, the giant beast's body finally couldn't withstand the pressure from the inside and exploded. The light was so bright that Duriel City was as bright as day. Everyone could only see the long shadow of the magic tower in front of them. 10 seconds later, A thunderous sound came into everyone's ears. It's over?" Even Doris couldn't hear what she said, but Evelyn, who was beside her, could understand what she was lamenting about. After the roar, the sound of broken tentacles and minced meat falling to the ground could be heard. The pitter-patter sounded like dense raindrops, but it was not hard to imagine that at least 1/3 of the buildings in this city were covered and destroyed by the giant beast's carcass. This was a complete nightmare. From the moment Jill and Miranda were killed, Evelyn hoped that she could get rid of this nightmare as soon as possible. However, what made her dizzy was that the person who ended the nightmare was Roddy, whom they had never met before. "What's wrong with this world?" as she sighed. A shock wave with a strong stench swept across. "Because of the shelter of the magic tower, everyone is safe and sound." In the dust, Naifi held Akasha's hand tightly, but she tried to look at the other side of the tower. Even Sylvia, who was beside her, frowned and pursed her lips. At the same time, Roddy, who was not far from the center of the explosion, was under great pressure. There were 2 reasons why he dared to rush into the mother's body alone. One was his demon affinity as a disguise, and the other was the pardon effect of the Ring of Pardon. However, the invincibility created by the Ring of Pardon did not last forever. In order to avoid getting hurt, Roddy immediately rushed into a flattened bar after he rushed out of the giant beast's body. Because most bars in Latchman had basements for storing alcohol, he found one nearby and went in. However, even if he ran to the corner of the basement in time, the power of the explosion was still beyond his imagination. The energy of more than 50 magic crystal balls had turned the air expansion circle into an elemental storm that was as powerful as a forbidden spell. This kind of method to defeat the enemy would definitely be recorded in history. In just half a minute, the magic crystals that were equivalent to a year's worth of experiments in Duriel were reduced to ashes. The violent explosion was not as hot as the flame blast, but the pure shockwave still brought a force comparable to that of a tsunami. All the buildings within 200 meters of the mother's body were completely blown into pieces. Roddy, who was hiding in the basement, was not even covered by the wreckage of the building, because the whole bar had been uprooted. Amidst the pale golden light, the Ring of Pardon helped Roddy survive the fiercest stage of the impact. However, as soon as the effect of the Ring of Pardon ended, the discomfort caused by the change in pressure still made Roddy's vision turn black, and he almost fainted. Fortunately, Roddy had the heart of the demon hunter with his super resistance and HP. After the impact ended, he quickly recovered to his normal state. In the midst of the dust, Roddy saw the icon of the quest pane had changed. The icon of the Devil Disaster was flashing. 3 new icons appeared in the skill pane below, and he also received EXP. However, when he opened the quest pane, Roddy found that the mission was not over. Instead, a new notification popped up. "You defeated the primordial demon, but this is not the end, it was just a lonely sentence." Roddy squinted his eyes and immediately realized that the whole mission was not over. Judging from the information from the white soul crystal, it was obvious that this primordial demon was not that easy to kill. Roddy could conclude that it was only defeated and not dead. Pushing away the debris in front of him, Roddy, who was covered in dust, got up and patted the dust off his body. Just when he was about to step out of the raised bar, he suddenly felt something vibrating around his waist. He looked down and saw that the milky white soul crystal was letting out a faint buzzing sound. Roddy wanted to take it out for a closer look, but his body shuddered. The mental impact that he had experienced before came again. However, this time, Roddy found that the scenes that appeared in front of him were no longer chaotic and illogical. Instead, it was like a movie, allowing him to quickly understand the beginning and end of Edith's encounter with the Matrix. More than 700 years ago, the giant demon suddenly came ashore just like now. However, with the power of the High Elves' port city at that time, Even a simple cannon attack was enough to deal with the matrix that was only 30 to 40 feet tall. However, what happened next gave Rhodey a sense of déjà vu. The port officials' evasions, delays, and inaction allowed the matrix to gain a foothold after disembarking and quickly grow with the help of the crystals it absorbed. Chapter 720. Edith was the first Grand Arcanist to rush back after the city was half destroyed. What Roddy saw was the Arcanist's first-person perspective. Edith, with her staff in hand, took the lead and charged at the Mother with more than 10 students in her mage tower. However, the bombardment did not work. Instead, the Arcanists were either killed or injured. In order to prevent the Mother from evolving to an unimaginable level, Edith finally chose to blast open the Mother's body and find its final weakness before self-destructing. Roddy pursed his lips. Perhaps it was because of the soul transmission, but he could feel Edith's determination and reluctance at that time. Sacrifice was easy to say, but it was too difficult to do it. A Grand Arcanist who sacrificed her life to protect a city was already worthy of being called a hero. However, these scenes did not end there. Roddy found that the Mother did not die after the explosion. Instead, it disguised itself as a child and escaped back into the sea. Edith's soul was formed in the Mother's body at that time. Using her powerful mental power, she tried to completely imprison the evil magic crystal core. However, after the explosion of the destroyed High Elf city, no one could come out to help Edith. In the end, the Mother followed its instinct and returned to the deep sea. Although Edith was unwilling, there was nothing she could do. Therefore, in the next hundreds of years, the Soul Crystal kept trying to keep the seal, preventing her from recovering her original strength. However, as time passed, the seal became weaker and weaker. In the end, the Mother turned the tables. The mental corruption made Edith very miserable. However, with her great perseverance, she did not completely get corrupted after so many years. All kinds of emotions flashed in Roddy's heart. However, what surprised him the most was the last few scenes in front of him. There was a strange wave on the sea. The Mother went up as if it was summoned and received a red potion on the lonely boat. In this scene, Roddy saw a group of familiar figures. It was a few fair-skinned tuck women wearing golden muslin clothes. Roddy quickly understood the whole story. When the scene disappeared, Roddy found himself looking at the pair of azure eyes again. But this time, Edith's eyes were filled with anxiety. "Catch it! Catch it! Don't let it escape!" The echoing murmurs made Roddy realize that Edith's condition was probably very bad. After spending more than 700 years to seal the parent body, the entire soul crystal had reached the point where it was running out of oil. The only thing that kept it from collapsing was probably the obsession of killing the parent body. A white dot suddenly appeared on the map. Clearly, Edith had locked onto the current location of the parent. At the same time, a new notification popped up for the Oi Devil's Disaster a quest. Find the true body of the ancient beast. Edith is willing to do her best to help you catch it. You don't have much time left. Quest objective. Find the core of the parent body 0/1 quest reward. 128,000 EX. Pirati knew that he had to follow up with another attack, so he stuffed the crystal back into his pocket and leaped out of the ruins. In the next second, Roddy summoned the secondary flame spell and attached it to the arrow. After shooting it into the sky, he summoned the wind elemental. With the acceleration buff, he quickly rushed towards the bright spot on the map. Below the Colomir magic tower, after the shock wave subsided, the troops poked their heads out and looked at the sky that seemed to have suddenly cleared up. They did not make a sound for a long time. President Jeremy let out a long sigh. He could no longer sense the presence of the enemy, but that did not mean that the war was over. The Murlocs were still wreaking havoc in the city, and there were still many survivors of the big and small saplings. He immediately ordered loudly, "Form a defensive line. Clear the entire city." However, the team led by Akashao obviously did not intend to listen to him. The entire front line, led by Irwin, had already quickly moved towards the direction of the dock. Needless to say, they were looking for Roddy. As soon as they moved, Jeremy saw the entire front line moving with them, because the front line was basically made up of the resurrected Murlocs and the envoys of other countries. The team, including Bindugwa, had no interest in staying here and listening to Jeremy's command. They only knew that it was absolutely safe to follow this group of elite soldiers, so they consciously followed them. As soon as they left, the entire front line in front of the magic tower was almost instantly empty. This scene immediately stunned Jeremy and the other mages. Only then did the group of Lastman leaders realize that if not for Roddy's team in this war, they would not even be able to clear the battlefield. Change of plan. Rescue Roddy first. Clear all the enemies on the way. Jeremy coughed lightly and hurriedly gave a new order. Otherwise, how could they rely on a few commanders to form a defensive line? However, they had only taken a few steps when someone in front of them shouted, "What's that over there?" Looking up, the burning arrow drew a slightly dim trajectory in the night sky. Roddy's dragonbone bow was full of strength, and with the magic power of the guided arrow, the highest point of the arrow was almost more than 300 meters. However, at a distance of 4 to 5 kilometers, the trajectory disappeared in a flash and was soon drowned in the dust that had yet to disperse. Akasha and the others who were at the forefront saw this scene and immediately sped up again. Almost all of their warhorses were killed and injured in the impact. At this moment, they could only rely on Sylvia's magic and pure running to support them. On the battlefield in front of them, the mages who walked out of cover also saw Roddy's signal arrow. Just as they were hesitating whether they should go forward or not, a figure in the distant sky had already flown straight towards them. Merlin Sarah, with her robe torn and her long hair disheveled, had successfully withstood the impact of the explosion of the parent body, but she looked much more disheveled. However, she couldn't care less about the bloody wounds on her arms at this moment. She gritted her teeth and flew towards the pier that was littered with corpses. There, Roddy's arrows with all his might had already brought about a huge wave of explosive sparks. The parent body had completely lost its mountain-like appearance from before. Instead, it looked like a child body that was about 4 meters tall as it fled frantically. It used its tentacles to support its body and quickly retreated towards the shore. It thought that it could escape this disaster, but it didn't expect that it would be targeted by Roddy. If it was caught by a mage, it still had a way to evade. However, at this distance, Roddy's firepower was even more terrifying than that of 3 mages combined. Over 30 explosive arrows landed on the body of the parent body under the guided bombardment. The tentacles were blasted away by the explosion, and the speed at which it was fleeing towards the sea was greatly slowed down. In order to retaliate against Roddy, the tentacle quickly grabbed a rotten piece of wood on the way and threw it straight at Roddy. Bam! The earth elemental appeared in front of Roddy and blocked the wooden block with its body. During this time, Roddy's arrows continuously hit the eyes in the center of the parent body. The accurate arcane shots made the parent body twitch all over. It knew that if it continued to flee, it would most likely be shot to death. It turned around and pounced towards Roddy. However, before it could reach Roddy, a series of giant icicles fell from the sky and nailed it to the ground. Roddy! Merlin Sarah felt relieved when she saw Roddy shooting with his bow. However, she did not realize what the spawn in front of her was. As soon as the spell in her hand slowed down, she saw the monster quickly spewing thick black mist around. At the same time, a spherical shadow less than a meter long emerged from under its body and quickly fled to the distant dock in the black mist. This escape skill could scare Merlin Sarah, but it couldn't scare Roddy, who had Edith's soul crystal. He quickly locked onto the figure and used sprint and leap in succession, but it was difficult for the arrows to hit the black shadow that was weaving in and out of the ruins. When Roddy realized that the opponent was about to reach the pier, he suddenly had an idea. He used the demon deterrence skill that he had just obtained and locked onto the target in front of him. Hiss! With a strange hiss, the spherical octopus-like monster's body stiffened. Its originally soft tentacles stood upright and stretched out in all directions, and it fell to the ground as if it had been electrocuted. But the parent body's mental resistance was too high. Even though its strength had been weakened to this extent, this stun effect only lasted for a second before it ended. Its tentacles quickly curled up, and it trembled as it propped up its body, ready to continue its escape. But Roddy wouldn't let go of this opportunity. He grabbed the parent body's tentacles and threw it to the ground like a sack. Roddy unsheathed his short sword and stabbed it into the opponent's body with all his strength. The soft and slippery tentacles whipped his face and body wildly, but they couldn't stop the sharp blade from pinning it to the ground. In the next second, Merlinsera's freeze followed closely. She cast it 3 times in a row, and it and the short sword that Roddy had let go of were both frozen into ice cubes. "What is this thing?" Merlinsera landed beside Roddy and staggered a little. "The main body of the sea monster, we have to." Roddy raised his head and saw Merlinsera's face clearly. The words that were about to come out of his mouth were stuck in his throat. Blood flowed down her cheeks and onto her clothes. The sleeves of her robe had almost disappeared, and her arms were even redder. Merlinsera also had a wound on her thigh, so she couldn't even walk properly. Roddy didn't expect her to be so badly injured, but when he remembered that she was the first one to arrive here to help him, he immediately understood. "What do we have to do? Kill it?" Merlinsera took a step forward and raised the magic wand in her hand, but she couldn't help but fall to the side because her legs were weak. Roddy held her in his arms. Wait, he took out Edith's soul crystal, and at the same time, he found that one step of Devil's Disaster had been completed in the mission panel. After the EXP reward, the content had also been updated. Help Edith fulfill her last wish. Mission objective: place the soul crystal and the ancient sea monster's evil magic crystal together. Mission reward: Lastman's hero 4530000 EXP. Merlinsera wanted to stand up, but she couldn't maintain her balance due to her severe injuries. After Roddy held her arm, she finally gave up and obediently leaned into Roddy's arms. Her heart was beating fast, so she could only turn her attention to the struggling mother in front of her. When she saw that the mother had cracked the ice, she quickly waved her magic wand and froze it again. However, as soon as she finished casting the spell, she frowned. "Who's talking? No, it's using mind magic on me. I can feel it too." Roddy stared at the small monster in front of him. Because of the Dragon Slayer's mark, he was almost immune to most mind magic, but he could still hear the monster's incessant murmurs. The strength of the monster's mind was far beyond his imagination. If Merlinsera wasn't also a dragon's, she might have already fallen for the spell and let it go. Perhaps only a grand arcanist like Edith could handle such a troublesome character. If it were any other magician, who would dare to say that they wouldn't be eroded? Roddy turned his head and saw a few black dots flying in his direction in the distant sky. They should be the sorcerers coming over to investigate. This meant that there was a serious problem. The sorcerers were probably interested in the person in front of them and wanted to bring him to the laboratory to dissect and study him. Roddy didn't believe that they could withstand the monster's mind erosion, but he also didn't trust the solution in front of him. Edith's soul crystal had been eroded before. Although the mission was to fulfill Edith's last wish, it didn't say that they could completely kill the ancient sea monster. Roddy didn't dare to be careless with this problem, so he immediately discussed with Merlin Sarah how to kill the monster. Merlin Sarah didn't waste any time. She used her elemental slash to cut the frozen, main body into pieces, revealing the fist-sized gray crystal in front of them. "Let me take care of it. Thank you for doing so much, human." Edith's words appeared in Rhodey's mind, but he completely ignored them. He continued to attack the crystal with Merlin Sarah in all sorts of ways. But what surprised them was that no matter if it was the sword slashes or the various elemental attacks, they couldn't cause any damage to it. Even a dragon crystal would be damaged and completely shattered under continuous attack. But the Matrix crystal obviously didn't belong to this situation. It's existed for too long. It's very difficult to break the mental barrier after demonization. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.